Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Nika Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Gamestyle Anchor Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. The funeral had been a quiet thing. Momo would have liked it. Izuku found himself thinking as he and Kyoka sat in front of the grave after laying down her favorite flowers, orchids, and amaryllis. It had been a decent day, as far as weather comes. It had been mostly sunny, and now the sun was slowly going down below the horizon, lighting the sky up in orange, red, pink and purple. Izuku cleaned up his tears once more. Are you sure that it will work? He turned to look at Kyo, still dressed in the black dress she'd worn for the funeral, who was looking at him with concern. I don't know what I'll do if it doesn't. He didn't lie about the quirk, you know it as well as I do, and the tests we tried to do worked. I can only hope that what we know now will be enough. She squeezed his shoulder lightly, and he moved his hand on top of hers. Be careful, Izu. I will. I'll make sure we get the future the three of us dreamed about. The battle against All for One had been won. The cost, however, had been far too great for any one of the members of Class 1A. Countless pros had died, and even some of their classmates. Katsuki had taken a direct blow aimed at Izuku, dying almost on the spot. Momo had been pierced by some steel beams that All for One had thrown at her to stop her from giving support to her friends. Minoru had been crushed under a falling building as he tried to stick All for One to a wall. Izuku's mom had been in that building. She hadn't made it out alive. Izuku had cried for hours after All for One's death. The villain's dying words had been for her. It wasn't supposed to go like this, my boy. I'm sorry for Inko. Izuku had punched him until he stopped talking. It didn't help that he kept that sorrowful look until his last moment. It didn't help that he'd given him a quirk to fix this. It's called Anchor. You can use it to go back to any point in your life and avoid their deaths. You won't be able to come back here, though. Kyoka had confirmed that he wasn't lying. Izuku took some time to grieve with his girlfriend and his friends. They'd won, but at a far greater cost than any 16-year-old could afford to take. That evening, Izuku tucked Aries covers around her for the last time, and he kissed her forehead. Dad's going away for some time, sweetheart. I'll always be back for you, and I'll make sure Mum comes back as well. Eri had already been asleep, as she'd cried until she was exhausted after Momo's death. He still felt that he needed to say this to his daughter. In the kitchen, Kyoka had made them 2 mugs of black tea. Izuku sat next to her, and she immediately placed her head on his shoulder, sighing. I'll miss you. If everything goes right, you won't even notice I was gone. He felt her shake, and wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. I love you, Kyoka. I will seek you out as soon as I can, I promise. She kissed him, and he kissed her back. There was a kind of despair in that moment, but he understood her feelings, and he felt the same way. I love you too, Izuku. I'll go put these in the sink, even though it doesn't really matter. He smiled at her before kissing her forehead one last time. I'll see you soon, my love. You and Momo both. Using Anchor was always a weird feeling for Izuku. It was different than using any of the quirks within One for All, and different from some of the quirks he had taken from villains after the war. Those quirks each felt in their own way, but they had in common the feeling of a cool wind, something refreshing. Anchor was blinding and incredibly hot. It was as if he was being born by an undying fire, something so hot that it would be able to turn him to ashes and burn those as well. This time wasn't an exception, obviously. Izuku was lucky he had a pain tolerance level as high as he did, as that was the only thing that kept him from screaming in pain. He felt, almost saw, his life passing in front of him, going backwards. The fight against All for One. All Might's death. His friends fighting him to go back at UA together. The war. Training with Endeavor, and with 1B. The Shai Hasaikai raid. Patrol with Lemillion. The memories went by so fast he could barely keep track, and then, suddenly, the sunlight blinded him. He moved one arm to cover his eyes, and when his vision focused again, he saw the massive gates in front of Ground Beta and the crowd of people who were trying to get through the entrance exam. I'll do better this time, Kyoka, Momo. Izuku stared ahead, ready for what was to come. He'd save everyone for real, this time. Izuku looked around himself, taking a moment to enjoy the quiet that came before the exam. Danger Sense was, for the first time in a long time, quiet, and that felt like a blessing in and of itself. He still felt Tenya approaching him. The poor guy would never be the stealthiest hero, especially with that hero costume. Hey, you, are you by any chance someone sent by the principal to disrupt the exam for the participants? Izuku had almost forgot that this was the second thing the speedster had told him. Not that I'm aware of, no. Although I really wouldn't put it past Nizu to do something like this, considering how much fun he has messing with people. Tenya frowned and went away, leaving Izuku once again alone with his thoughts. He tried to flex one for all, just to feel how his body would react to it. Lightning crackled for a moment around him, before he winced and stopped pushing. Apparently his body wasn't really able to withstand anything above 5%, not yet at least. That's fine, I can work with this. At least I still have the others' quirks, and the few ones I took, for any emergency. Present Mick's voice rang through the loudspeakers. Very well, listeners. I've just been informed that all the attendees have reached their respective arenas. The exam starts now. Izuku barely took notice of the doors opening, dashing through them as soon as Mike gave them the go-ahead. What are you waiting for? There are no countdowns in real life. That guy had the right idea. Izuku heard the stampede of the other attendees behind him as he smashed through the first couple of robots. He could do better than last time. He needed to do better than last time. He breezed through the exam until the 0-pointer came out. 67 points, just 10 below Kaken. Too bad, I'll have to make do with the rescue points. He barely took notice of everyone else dashing away from the massive robot, and instantly zeroed in on Achiko's position, smashing the debris she was under to smithereens and using Black Whip to cushion her from the impact. He then picked her up and, powering Ofa slightly above his threshold of pain, dashed away from there, using Float and Fa Gene to pick up more speed. The wind that came from the robot hitting the place he was in a second prior pushed them even further, which gave them an extra push away from the robot. Izuku got out of the entrance before putting down Achiko and sitting next to her, wincing in pain. The exam ended immediately after that. Recovery Girl was there shortly after, healing the wounded and handing them gummies. Are you hurt, sweetie? He smiled at her. I think I pulled a couple muscles when dashing out, and she's got a sprained ankle. 2 kisses and 2 waves of exhaustion later, Izuku found himself still sitting down, chewing on some gummies and waiting for the bus to come around. Thank you. Achiko's voice was so quiet he barely heard her. It's what a hero would have done, right? He beamed at her, and she smiled back. I'm Achiko Uraraka, what's your name? Izuku Midoriya, nice to meet you. Again, he added mentally while shaking her hand. I hope we both got in, what you did there was very cool. He felt his cheeks redden slightly and nodded, before hearing the bus come in. Izuku got up, stretching for a moment, before pulling Achiko up as well. I'll see you in the halls then, oh Uraraka. She smiled, seemingly ignoring his slip-up. Yes Midoriya, I hope so. The bus ride back to the locker room was boring, to say the least, but at least Izuku had some time to plan his next move. As soon as he got in the locker, he picked his phone from his bag. There were only a couple phone numbers saved on it, but that didn't matter, as the phone number he needed was one he had learned by heart some months back. After punching in the number, he hit the call button, and waited for some time, before hearing a shrill voice answer. Am I Mouse? Am I a dog? Am I a bear? Who cares? I'm Nizu, the principal of UA. With whom do I have the pleasure of speaking? Chimera. Silence came from the other end of the phone, and for a moment Izuku feared the principal would hang up immediately. Now, that's a word I haven't heard in a long time. Come to my office at your earliest convenience, so that we may talk about who gave you this passcode. Yes sir. Would you mind calling in Eraserhead as well? I feel that my information will benefit him as well. Very well, I will certainly call him. See you soon. The first part was done, now he just had to talk with Aizawa and Nizu. Izuku quickly sent a text to his mom, warning her he might be a bit late because he had a couple of things to do with some friends, before knocking on the principal's door. Come in. He opened the door, taking in the office. It was pretty much how he remembered it, massive, and somewhat empty, with only a desk, a chair behind it and a couple sofas on the sides. On the chair was sitting Nizu, in his usual attire, whereas Aizawa was sitting on one of the sofas, glaring at Izuku. Welcome, young man. Now, I won't beat around the bush too much, and I'll ask you directly, how did you come to learn of the Chimera Code? Izuku smiled. You explained it to me, sir. Or rather, you will, in about 15 months. Aizawa straightened himself slightly, and Nizu's smile widened. Allow me to introduce myself, I'm Izuku Midoriya, and I come from the future, in spite of how absurd it sounds. What the f-? I would usually agree with you, Aizawa-sensei, but what I've lived through in the last couple weeks of my life was unsettling enough. Izuku wasn't sure if Aizawa looked like he wanted to knock him out, go to sleep, drink something extremely strong or all three in some unspecified order. Very well Midoriya, would you mind explaining yourself better? Nizu pointed at the sofa, and Izuku took a seat, well aware of most of the principal's safety measures. Only most, as it was nigh impossible to predict the high-specs user entirely. First of all, sir, I have to explain a couple of things about my quirks. Yes, Plural. Nizu froze for a moment, a reaction so quick Izuku wondered if he'd actually seen it. The principal was good at hiding his own reactions, anyways, Izuku would give him that. I'm the 9th, Nizu-sensei. I am also, unfortunately, the 2nd. The principal looked at him with a neutral stare, while Aizawa looked more and more confused with each passing second. Will someone explain what the F is going on? Soon enough, Eraser. Midoriya, if what you're saying is true, that means that your father is the greatest villain to ever roam the earth? Yes, I'm aware of that. I have his quirk to prove it. It also means that my stepfather is the greatest hero known so far, and I also have his quirk to prove it, although that isn't really related to him being my father. Nizu chuckled at that, and his smile returned in full force. Very well. Eraser, it's my pleasure to introduce you to All for One Son, as well as the one wielder of the 2 greatest quirks known to man. Aizawa furrowed his brow, staring at both. All for One isn't that well known yet, but he will soon be, Aizawa-sensei. I'm here to make sure that history changes, mostly to avoid unnecessary deaths and maiming. It took a bit to explain what he'd seen. Izuku also had to take a number of breaks, as some parts still hurt him greatly, some wounds too. Fresh to prod at without wincing. In the end, I managed to kill my father, but I lost my mother, my girlfriend, and many of my friends in that fight. I'm here to make sure that his plans don't come to fruition and that people don't have to uselessly die to stop them. Aizawa had that look that meant he wanted to drink himself into a coma. Nizu was grimacing, which was bad enough in and of itself. I'm assuming All Might is already aware of all of this? Izuku smiled at the principal's question. As a matter of fact, no. He isn't aware of any of this, and I wasn't planning on telling him. Nizu stared at him with wide eyes. Why's that? He would certainly be helpful in whatever plan you have. Maybe. But I also know that he needs to ease the weight of the world off his shoulders and onto the hero communities, which he won't do if I tell him anything about this. I will punch him for not telling me about AFO and the vestiges, however. Izuku felt his phone vibrate and looked at it to see a text from All Might. Speak of the devil. Principal Nizu, Aizawa-sensei, I sincerely thank you for your time and hope to see you soon in these halls. I have a mentor to argue with and some preparations to make before the year starts. Very well Midoriya, we'll see you soon in here. You will be in Eraser's class, since he's already aware of your predicament. Izuku nodded, getting up and heading towards the door. He turned back to bow to the principal and his teacher before leaving, headed for Dagoba Beach. All Might would not know what hit him. The beach's air was soothing, Izuku found out. He didn't remember ever taking some time to just enjoy the place and the atmosphere that the beach always had, but he'd try to do so, as long as he had time. He took off his shoes and rolled his pants up just below his knees, and got closer to the water. It had been a nice day. One of the first ones, even though he didn't remember it like this. Young Midoriya? Izuku grimaced at his mentor's voice, before schooling his face in a neutral expression and turning towards him. All Might, or rather Toshinori Yagi, was standing in front of him in skeletal form, looking at him with concern. Yagi. How are you? I should be asking you that, my boy. I saw your behavior at UA, and your control over Ofa. Izuku smiled. Of course it wasn't about him. I have a couple of words to say, Yagi, but most of them are rather impolite and shouldn't be shared with one's future teacher, so I'll just settle for this. Why the F, didn't you tell me about All for One? All Might flinched. How? I know because the previous holders told me, Yagi. Nana is quite disappointed. If Yagi was any paler, he'd resemble Shigaraki's hair. And yes, I've been talking with the vestiges. As a matter of fact, they've all allowed me to use their quirks, something I know you have a notebook filled with information on. Now, is there anything else you want to tell me? Yagi looked at him with a hint of sadness. I'm sorry, young Midoriya. I didn't want to tell you about All for One because I'm sure I killed him 5 years ago. As for the previous holders, I didn't know it was possible to interact with them in any way. Would you please fill me in on that? Izuku was slightly upset at his mentor, but he didn't hate the man. Not after he died to keep him safe, anyways. The greenette sighed and sat down, patting the sand right beside him. Come sit with me, All Might. I'll tell you what they told me. Yagi did that, and Izuku turned to look at the sea. They told me about One for All's origin. The tale of the 2 brothers, their fights and struggles with the villain. Nana told me about Gran Torino. Izuku sighed. Dachi told me she's proud of the hero you've become. If All Might dried a couple tears off, Izuku didn't mention it. He knew the man's mentor was doing the same by his other side, anyways. They had a long talk. It was tiring and draining, but Izuku felt that it was something they both needed to get out there before long. He kept the promise he'd made to Nizu, however. He wouldn't share anything about the future, or about being All for One's son, unless it became strictly necessary for All Might to know, or Izuku couldn't hide it any longer. He was still glad that Kyoka had helped him learn how to lie in a more convincing manner. She still got him, but that was a given. Izuku eventually left All Might on the beach to absorb that knowledge. The sun was slowly setting, and he still had one thing to do before being able to go back home. Dialing the number, he waited as the phone rang, until the other person picked it up. "I know you don't want to talk to me, but we have to talk. Meet me at the park, our old spot. It's important." The other person didn't speak, he just grunted and hung up. Izuku could only hope that he'd show up. By the time he'd made it to the park, it was dark already. Not late, but dark. His mom would worry, but Izuku was somewhat resigned to that. It felt weird to look at some of those old things. This park would be torn down in just a year and a half during a battle. The buildings surrounding it won't last much longer, just a couple of minutes. That is, unless Izuku had something to say about it. The sound of footsteps on the rocky terrain alerted him that his guest had arrived. "I hope you've got something very important to talk to me about, Deku." Izuku spun around, smiling. Tears were prickling his eyes, but he wasn't going to cry yet, no matter how much he'd missed Kaken in that last PRD. "Hi, Kaken. Of course it's important, who do you take me for?" Silence. Katsuki wasn't used to Izuku being confident and genuinely chipper, right? "Come sit next to me. We have a lot of things to talk about." The explosive blonde just stared at him for a moment, an unreadable scowl on his face, before sighing and getting closer. Fine, but make it quick. "I have a quirk now." That was what Izuku decided to open with. Maybe not the wisest choice, but certainly something that got a reaction out of Katsuki. "What the Deku? Where did it come from?" Izuku sighed. "I actually have a lot more than one, but let me explain, will you? I'm trusting you on this." Silence, followed by a jerky nod. Izuku explained. He spoke about an ancient conflict between two brothers, one who could take and give quirks, the other who had no quirk of his own. Of how the older brother gave the younger one a quirk, only to find out that the brother had a quirk capable of passing itself on. Of how those two quirks fused into one, that was passed down generation to generation, hero to hero, until it reached All Might. Of how the older brother, a nigh immortal being, fell in love with a common woman, having a child with her. Of how that child, bullied for looking quirkless, ended up receiving both the quirk of his father and the one from his uncle. Of the training, the war, the deaths. Izuku told Katsuki everything. Around midway through, Izuku was crying, but he kept talking. He kept talking until his voice was hoarse, his throat dry, until he didn't have any more tears to cry in mourning for the people he'd lost, for the family he couldn't possibly get back without hurting them again. And, at the end, Katsuki put a hand on his head. He said nothing. He didn't blow up, or scream, or yell that it had to be a lie. He let Izuku cry, keeping that hand on his head until he stopped. "How many others know about this?" Izuku sniffled, cleaning up his tear tracks, before answering. "Only you, Principal Nizu and our future teacher, Eraserhead. I didn't tell All Might, I don't want him to get hurt further." Katsuki nodded jerkily, and silence claimed them for a moment. The blonde was still petting Izuku's hair, and neither mentioned it. "What's your plan?" Izuku sighed, teary-eyed and tired. They had a long way to go through, but he had some people in his corner. "We're into UA. The first thing to do is catch Shigaraki before he destroys the barrier. If we can't do that, we'll see where we go next." Katsuki nodded, getting up. "Go home, Deku. And keep me up to speed on this FING plan." Izuku nodded, doing just that. His mom cried, worried about him, but he just smiled, holding her close. "Sorry, Mum. I had to visit some friends, and then I lost track of the time while talking with Kaken." She smiled, and Izuku excused himself, claiming tiredness to go to sleep. It was going to be a long road, but Izuku had no intention to fail. He'd already seen where that brought him. After the entrance exam, Izuku and Katsuki stayed in a weird limbo, relationship-wise. It reminded Izuku of how it was after the sludge villain's attack. They didn't speak much nor interact, but it was different from their past, mostly in the occasional glances they'd shoot each other. Katsuki was still the same angsty teenager, of course, but there was a sense of understanding now, some respect behind his eyes. It would be good enough to not argue with him for the entire first semester, hopefully. The acceptance letter arrived, obviously. It was, once again, voiced by All Might, who had kept training Izuku even after the entrance exam, this time. Probably because the Greenette was aware of the massive target on his back, or maybe because he needed to get a grip on as much power as he possibly could. "I am here. As a hologram. Young Midoriya, you brilliantly passed the written exam with a 100%, well done. During the practical exam, you got 67 villain points, which would already allow you into UA. But what kind of hero school would we be, if we didn't also consider your heroic spirit? For your efforts in keeping the other participants safe, you've been awarded 50 rescue points, which brings your point total up to 117. Congratulations young Midoriya, and welcome to your hero academia. Predictable, but Izuku wasn't going to complain. Not destroying the zero-pointer had really cost him 10 points, however. Weird. And, eventually, the first day came in. Izuku wouldn't deny a little bit of excitement, although it was because he'd get to see his hopefully soon-to-be girlfriends again. And then, panic. He'd have to earn their love again. Izuku sighed deeply, trying and failing to tie a tie properly, before picking up his backpack and going to put his shoes on. Did you get your lunch, Izuku? Yes, Mom. And your handkerchief? Yes, Mom. Izuku, what is it? He turned to look at her, only to see her smiling at him. I'm proud of you. Izuku smiled back, trying to force back that small streak of worry that was plaguing him. Thank you, Mom. Now I really have to go, or I'll be late. There weren't many differences. He didn't meet anyone on the train, but out of the corner of his eye, he thought that he was seeing streaks of purple not far away. Whenever he turned to look, however, someone else would move in front of him, or the train would get dark because of a gallery, and he would see nothing. He put his headphones in and focused on the music for a bit. It was one of the first couple of songs Kyoka had suggested he listen to, right after the sports festival. They didn't talk much before the culture festival, but they traded music every now and then. It was a fond memory of his, the times they spent listening to that song, The Search by NF. A small vibration hit the base of his neck, startling Izuku out of muttering the lyrics, and as he looked up, he saw purple. Listening to NF, huh? Why yeah, a friend suggested I do, they got my tastes in one. You're going to UA? Why was she so cute? Yup, and you are too, I see. Kyoka Jairu, nice to meet you. He shook her hand, smiling. Izuku Midoriya, the pleasure is all mine. They talked for the rest of the trip, as Izuku heard her repeat so many things he already knew about her. It was tempting to mess with her a bit, and he did so every now and then. And yeah, I live in Shizuoka. Dude. How the F, do you know that? I'm a psychic. I know a bunch of stuff about a bunch of people. Kyoka scoffed, a small smile tugging at her lips. Bullshit, there's no such thing as a psychic. Try me then. Ask me something you think no one else knows. Kyoka looked at him, a challenging smile on his lips. Fine. If I'm right, you're getting my jacks in your eyes. Fair. But if I know what you're asking me, you'll go out for coffee with me. She sighed. We'll see. So, what's my favorite band and my favorite song of theirs? Izuku smiled. He'd memorized that fact so long ago, it was basically engraved in his mind. Deep dope, and it's a trick question, you love all of their songs so much because it's your parents' band. And there she was. Wide-eyed, jaw opened, staring at him. Close that mouth, Jairu, people are staring. He gently pushed her jaw up until it was closed again. You're cheating. I don't know how, Midoriya, but you cheated. Don't be a sore loser. Here, this is our stop. It felt weird to be the one doing the ribbing, but Izuku didn't mind that much. About going out, I was joking. If you don't want to do that, we don't have to. No, I'm fine with that. You're not bad looking, anyways. Izuku chuckled, feeling heat rising to his cheeks. He didn't need to turn to know that Kyoka was in a similar situation. Why, thank you. You're not bad yourself. Follow me, I know where our class is. Be prepared, we have a bunch of rowdy ones, as well as one incredibly cute girl you'll like. How the F dashed I told you, I'm a psychic. I still feel that's bullshit, Midoriya, but whatever. Lead the way. The first day was the same as usual. Quirk assessment test, in which Izuku did pretty well, only breaking one finger, just like last time, and only because Aizawa-sensei definitely has it out for him. Achiko thanked him again for what he did during the entrance exam. He started forming a bit of a friendship with her, Tenya and Kyoka, and he snuck a couple looks at Momo. Kyoka did the same, to be fair, so don't judge him. Hey, Yaoyorozu, don't tell the group that Aizawa's expulsion thing is a logical ruse. The Ravenet turned towards him with a surprised look, before whispering back. How did you know? Also, do I know you? Izuku's heart squeezed for a moment at that, but he kept his smile up. No, you don't. I'm Izuku Midoriya, nice to meet you, I'm a psychic. She rolled her eyes, smiling at him. Unlikely, but we'll talk about that later, Midoriya. And fine, I won't say so. Izuku nodded, shooting her a thumbs up. The second day was more or less the same gig. All Might taught them, which meant that they were brought to ground beta and instructed to beat the sheet out of one another, as any good teacher would when put in front of a bunch of superpowered teenagers. Izuku felt surprised that none of them died on their second day, especially considering Kaken's attitude and Shudo's. Well, a bit of everything, really. Izuku got still paired with Ochako, and they were still put against Tenya and Kaken. Unlike last time, however, Kaken didn't get to throw a hissy fit halfway through the fight, as Izuku actually knew how to use his quirk and used it to float up to the 5th floor with Ochako, getting in through a window and touching the bomb before Tenya could do anything about it. The others performed more or less admirably. Shudo froze the entire building, as he'd done previously, and reached the bomb with no help from Mizo and no intermissions from Mashireo and Toru. Tsuyu and Fumikage easily overpowered Ijiru's and Hanta's defenses, just like Yuga and Mina managed to do against Rikido and Koji. The only win the villain teams managed to get came from Momo's intelligence and Minoru's ability to create traps, but Kyoka and Denki showed a great amount of fight, and they only lost because of time, really. Izuku made sure to compliment both Kyoka and Momo, as a first memory of why Minoru was so unpleasant started to show its ugly head. The grape liked to look at women, and he touched without permission. Izuku would keep it in mind. Day 3 rolled around, and for the first time, Kaken came to meet Izuku in front of his house. "Today's it, right?" Izuku just nodded as they started to head towards the station. "What do you have in mind?" "I'm not sure. He'll be hidden between the press. I don't know if we can actually get him only on the suspicion that he's a villain, even if Aizawa-sensei knows." "So you're saying that we have to let him act?" "Huh." Izuku groaned. "Of course not, Kaken. But how the F are we supposed to apprehend him if he's not committed any crimes that can be proven, or we're inside of school? Anything he does to the barrier we can't attribute to him, and even if we could dash." "Oh, Midoriya. And Bakugo too? I didn't know you two knew one another." Izuku turned to look at Kyoka, quick to hide his worry with a smile. "Hi Jairu. Yeah, me and Kaken have known each other since we were very little." "Kaken, you've at least seen Jairu in class, right?" The blonde scoffed. "Yeah, I've seen ears around. You, her and Ponytail are together quite often." Izuku felt a bit of heat creeping up his neck, but hid it well. The press was just as annoying as Izuku remembered, if not more. Luckily, when they arrived, Tenya was giving this massive speech about nothing in particular, so they managed to slip through almost unnoticed. Keyword is almost. While walking through, Izuku felt a pair of eyes drilling the back of his head, as danger sense flared for a moment. He took a moment to turn around, almost casually, and he met Tamura Shigaraki's eyes. Izuku silently shook his head while looking in the other man's eyes, before walking in. He was vaguely aware of the fact that Tenya got dragged in by Aizawa and that the UA barrier was slammed shut in front of the journalists. They elected the class president, just like last time. Just like last time, Izuku got the most votes, followed directly by Momo. Just like last time, after lunch, Izuku stepped down from the position and gave it to Tenya. The gate crumbling to dust had scared many students, and he had lacked the readiness to jump and stop them, but Tenya hadn't. He would make a fine hero, once he got over that thing about the rules. Just before leaving, Izuku turned to look at Kyoka. "Go on without me, there's something I need to talk to Aizawa-sensei about." "I'll wait for you outside? We were supposed to go for that coffee today." Izuku smiled. "Sure, I'll be out in a minute." Everyone else was out soon enough, but Izuku was in front of Aizawa before the teacher could leave. "Midoriya." "Sir. Villains will attack tomorrow morning at the USJ. They call themselves the League of Villains. They will be a mostly disorganized group of small fries. The only dangerous ones are a warper called Kurojairi, a young man called Tamura Shigaraki, and a bioweapon with multiple quirks that they call a Numu. The attack will gravely harm you and 13, as well as reduce All Might's time limit significantly." Aizawa listened in silence, nodding at the end. "Thank you for this information. I will go check out the USJ with 13 beforehand, and if the place is safe, you will be allowed to go there, just like we'd originally planned. Go on now, have a nice rest of the day." The date with Kyoka was good. They went to a coffee shop in the Muzutafu area, chatting about random things as Kyoka still tried to prove he wasn't a psychic. "Look, I don't know what I can say or do to prove it, Jairu, you just have to take it as a fact. Do I have to spell out your sexuality for you to believe me? Go ahead Mophead, you can't be psychic. You're bisexual, leaning slightly towards girls but liking guys as well, and you're polyamorous. So is Yaoyorozu, by the way, even though she's still realizing that she's bi, and I'm bi and poly too. Most of the class is queer in some way." Kyoka was blushing horribly, and to be fair, Izuku felt his own cheeks heating up quite a bit in that whole sentence. The date was fun, the most fun he'd had in a long time. Aizawa didn't make it, and neither did 13. As soon as they'd got into the USJ and started their inspection, the villains had appeared. It didn't matter how strong they both were, or their quirks, or their experience. They didn't stand a chance. Present Mike was the one who informed them. The man was broken. Izuku felt numb for a bit, before Anchor's heat made itself known. Ground Beta's gates were in front of him, as well as the massive crowd of people who were trying to get through UA's entrance exam. Izuku took a deep, shuddering breath. From the top, the robots went down like pudding under Izuku's blows, in spite of the forced limitation of 5%. Danger Sense was working as usual, warning him of the robots around him and the people who could be hurt by his actions. Then the zero-pointer came up, and Izuku once again saved Achiko, kicking the debris on top of her away and lifting her up with Black Whip, only to run like hell until they were out. "Thank you, I'm Achiko Uraraka. Izuku Midoriya, I hope you got in." "Chimera. I'm the 9th, and technically the 2nd. Why didn't you tell me about All for One?" "Kaken, we have to talk." On the train for his first day, Izuku's nerves were starting to mellow down a bit. Clearly he couldn't warn Aizawa. Which meant they'd have to get in the USJ. The search was droning in one of his ears, having elected to not put on the other headphone, and he found himself muttering the lyrics again, until one of Kyoka's jacks poked his neck again. "You're listening to NF, huh?" "Yeah, a friend suggested it to me, they got my taste in one." "You're going to UA? Whoever gets last place will be expelled." "Don't tell them it's a logical ruse, Yayorozu." Momo looked at him in surprise. "How do you know? Also, do I know you?" He smiled at her. "Izuku Midoriya, and I'm a psychic." She nodded, rolling her eyes but letting it slip. "Today we'll be doing battle trials. You're picking a class president. Wake me up when you're done." "So, are we still on for that coffee later?" Izuku nodded. "Yeah, of course." He needed that moment of peace. He truly did. The bus ride to the USJ was mentally taxing for Izuku, and Kyoka noticed. "Midoriya? Is everything alright?" He took a deep breath, trying to steady his heartbeat. "Why yeah. I'm just excited for what we'll do." She smiled at him. "Yeah, so am I. But don't worry, with your quirk, I'm sure you'll manage to do whatever you need to." He could only hope so. Katsuki and Ijiru attacked Kurojairi immediately, and the group got scattered. He ended up with Tsuyu and Minoru in the water area, again. At least he didn't get wet, thanks to Float. Landing on the boat, especially with that a-hole creating water blades, was irritating, and Izuku could already feel some sparks rising in his throat, before finally managing to land in a crouch in the boat, just in front of Tsuyu and Minoru. "They don't know our quirks, and that's our advantage. Tsuyu, jump in the air with Mineta, who will throw his ball at them to blind them. I'll play distraction." The frog girl nodded, her tongue already wrapping around the grape's torso, before Izuku crouched in front of him. "Don't do anything perverted. I will know." Izuku channeled as much of his SPRM donor as he could in those 2 sentences, and if the visible flinch coming from the grape meant anything, it worked. Good. Izuku closed his eyes, counting down from 5 before using Float to rise up and, pushing his anger to the forefront of his mind, letting loose Black Whip on the poor villains. All men for themselves. They have fucking Cthulhu, run. He got Pete. Save yourselves. Okay, maybe All for One was right on one thing. Terrifying your enemies is exhilarating. He landed a couple minutes later, just on the edge of the plaza, just in time to see the Numu smashing Eraserhead's skull into the ground. 13 had already been injured, and this was now his teacher's injury. If it kept going like this, they'd go back to the main track. Izuku threw Black Whip forward, latching it around Shigaraki's leg and pulling it back, making him fall flat on his face before his hands could get any closer to Aizawa's elbow. One small victory. Kurojairi was behind them before he could do anything else, however, and then they were back in the sky, falling freely on top of the fire hazard area. The heat of Encore made itself known again. Ground Beta's entrance gates were in front of him, and around him the countless other attendees who wanted to get through UA's entrance exam. He's got the right idea. "I'm Achiko Uraraka. Chimera. I'm the 9th. Sit next to me, All Might. Kaken, listen to me." "Listening to NF, huh? Don't tell them it's a logical ruse, Yayorozu. You'll be randomly paired up. You have until the end of homeroom. It's the press. This behavior is unbecoming of UA students like US. Are we still on for that coffee, later?" He tried to immediately choke Kurojairi with Black Whip, this time, failing and bringing about Katsuki's and Ijiru's attempt, which scattered them again. Once more in the flood area. Izuku just grabbed Tsuyu and Minoru and flew as fast as he could, throwing air bullets at whoever came too close. Aizawa was still facing against some of the small fries, but Shigaraki was muttering something next to the Numu, which could only mean. The creature was on Aizawa before Izuku could react, punching him into a wall. Izuku knew what breaking bones sounded like, and that sounded like at least 3 broken ribs, 1 cracked vertebra and the beginning of a concussion. Izuku jumped into action, trying to bind the Numu before it could attack again, and pulling it back slightly. Just 2 steps, but it was enough. Izuku choked on some sparks, however, when the thing turned around, pulling on Black Whip and punching him straight in the center of his chest. Cracked ribs? No, the entire ribcage was caved in. The familiar heat of Encore made itself known. Are you by chance an instigator sent by Principal Nizu? Chimera. I'm from the future. All Might. I'm trusting you on this. I'm Kyokujairu. Why are you holding back, Midoriya? The hero team wins. Are we still on for that coffee? Stay down, Kaken. Izuku used smokescreen to try and buy some time to the group, shoving Tenya out and trying to not get them scattered. Unfortunately, as soon as the door got smashed down by Tenya running out, Kyokujairu scattered them again. Again in the flood area. Falling, or rather, floating above the enemies. One tendril of Black Whip immediately caught Minoru and Tsuyu, while Izuku powered himself up, exploding to the entrance as fast as he could, and just in time to tackle Shigaraki into the ground, just before he could order to the Numu to attack Aizawa. Not fast enough to avoid one of Shigaraki's hands touching Tsuyu's face. Anchor's familiar heat made itself known. Chimera. Kaken, we need to talk. You will be randomly paired up. Are we still on for that coffee, later? Izuku sat down behind Kyoka, beside Kaken. I'm jumping them as soon as they appear. Don't anger the Mist Man. Izuku had signed it, he didn't want to scare Kyoka. Kaken looked at him like he was crazy, before answering in sign. Why? We've done this song and dance more times than I can count. Do what I say, please. Izuku blinked tears away, feeling his throat closing. He was vaguely aware that Katsuki had turned to look at him. Please. I can't see you all die again. Kyokujairu scattered the group, again. Izuku didn't get sent away, as he was fighting in the plaza alongside with Aizawa, who kept shooting him nasty glares. Midoriya, you shouldn't be here. I'm not letting anyone die here, Eraser-sensei. Izuku bit down on his tongue to keep back the heat, elbowing a villain in their throat and throwing them at Shigaraki, who just grabbed them, dusting their body. Numu, get Eraserhead. I'll deal with the green-haired brat myself. Izuku tried to jump in the way of the Numu, leaving himself open. His leg gave up under him, slowly turning to dust. Anchor's familiar heat made itself known. I'm Kyokujairu. I'm from the future. Don't tell them it's a logical ruse, Yayorozu. Do not wake me up. I'm the 9th. How did you know? I'm a psychic. Are we still on for that coffee, later? Izuku was starting to feel exhausted. He'd lost count of how many times they'd gone through that same song and dance already, and nothing ever seemed to work. Of course, Jairu. Do you mind if I join you? Izuku turned around, only to see Momo standing behind him, smiling with a small blush on her cheeks. Oh, I'm sorry. I overheard you talking about getting coffee together, and I wanted to join you and talk a bit. You're some of the only people in class I've managed to talk to without issues. It's not a problem for me, as long as Midoriya is fine with it. This is different. Sure, it's fine by me, Yayorozu. We're going to that cat cafe 2 streets down. I've heard they have some of the best pastries. Momo clapped her hands together. Oh, I know of it. I've been told it's fantastic, and that they give a lot to charity too. Maybe not a bad different, however. I honestly still can't believe you're a psychic, Midoriya. There's no evidence that they exist. Izuku groaned, a smile tugging at his lips, while settling down his mug on the table. I don't know what I can do to prove it, Yayorozu. Ask me whatever, I'll answer. Kyoka was chuckling on his side, and he sent her a playful glare, only to see her sticking her tongue out at him in response. He'd missed this. What's our sexuality? Oh? Momo wasn't this straightforward, last I'd seen. Granted, it was after the sports festival, so? Can I say it out loud? I don't want to out either of you against your will. Kyoka was shaking her head with a fond smile. Sure, if you get it right it's fine. Same, I don't mind. Izuku nodded, before turning towards Kyoka. You're bisexual. You lean slightly towards girls, but bisexual nonetheless, and polyamorous too. And, you, he turned towards Momo, thought you were a lesbian, but then you got into UA and now you're not so sure anymore. You're poly too. It never stopped being funny, seeing them look at him with eyes wide and their jaws hanging low like that. Close your mouths, ladies. He gently pushed their jaws up, closing them, before taking another sip of his coffee. Aizawa would kill him for calling that thing coffee, especially considering the amount of milk he'd put in it, but Izuku couldn't find it in himself to care. How the F dash, Midoriya. He chuckled. I told you, Yaoyorozu, I'm a psychic. I had a lot of fun today, thank you both for your time. Momo was bowing in front of them, and Izuku could see out of the corner of his eye Kyoka's Jack starting to get restless. It's fine Yaoyorozu. I had fun too, and I'm sure Jairu did too. Let's trade phone numbers, so that we can do something like this again. Momo blushed, and so did Kyoka, but Izuku didn't acknowledge it, taking one phone first and then the other, punching in his number and the name Izuku Midoriya. Feel free to change my contact name to whatever suits you. I'll do the same. Do you want us to walk you somewhere, Yao dash? Call me Momo, or Yamamo. And no, thank you, Mido dash. If I'm calling you Momo, you can call me Izuku. The same goes for you, Jairu. The purplet blushed, nodding. Then you can call me Kyoka, I guess. Izuku nodded, as did Momo. Then we'll see you tomorrow, Momo. Have a safe trip back, and send a text when you're home. She nodded, waving at them as Izuku and Kyoka started heading back towards the train station. I had a lot of fun today, Izuku. Thank you. He turned slightly to smile at Kyoka. It was my pleasure, and I had lots of fun too, Kyoka. We should definitely do this more often. She smiled, and Izuku felt his heart skip a beat. All those resets had almost made him forget how beautiful she is. Maybe this time was different, but maybe it wouldn't be a bad thing? Izuku felt his mouth dry up as he saw the USJ in front of him. It hadn't gone well before, why should it go well now? Izuku? Is everything alright? Momo's voice, barely above a whisper, reached his ear. He shook his head. I don't know Momo. I have a bad feeling about this. He felt her hand grab his, squeezing it slightly. I'm sure we'll be fine, it's just some training, after all. You have no idea how wrong you can be. Villains started coming out of Warp Gate, and Izuku grimaced. Of course him going on a date with Kyoka and Momo wouldn't change anything for those plans. Katsuki, stay down. Izuku's voice left no room for objections, and the explosive blonde, after turning around with a shocked expression on his face, just nodded, turning back towards the obvious danger. Ida, get out of here and go alert UA faculty. Tenya was about to object, but Izuku's voice had a note of finality which forced him to obey. Kurojairi was in front of the exit just 2 seconds too late. Izuku sighed internally in relief. So far, so good. Greetings, we are the League of Villains. His eyes scanned them for a moment. We were told that All Might would be teaching here today. Was our intel wrong? It was. He won't be here today, some important hero work kept him back. Izuku was staring straight into the purple mist's yellow eyes, which narrowed on him. Oh, that's rather unfortunate. And you wouldn't know where we could possibly find him, would you? Izuku mentally groaned. Assuming that they did, why the F would they share that knowledge? I'm afraid I can't help you, sir. Would you mind moving aside, so that me and my class can get out of this place? Kurojairi's warp gate opening just below them was answer enough. Izuku started to float, but then he saw Kyoka and Momo falling in, and jumped after them. Keep the others safe, Katsuki. That's an order. The blonde didn't answer, so he'd either jumped already, or he was still back enough that he hadn't done anything stupid. Good. They were falling, rapidly, towards one of the chasms in the mountain area. Hold up. Mountain area? That's different, again. Black Whip had already slithered out, wrapping itself around Momo's and Kyoka's waists, as Izuku used float to slow their descent down as much as possible, eventually landing. What the F was that, Izuku? What, the banter or the tentacle-looking thing? Yes. Izuku didn't know if it was the situation as a whole, or maybe some bit of hysteria because of how many times he'd been through that same thing, but Momo's answer made him chuckle. The banter was me trying to buy us time as Ida gets back to school and alerts the faculty members. As for the tentacle, I'll explain later. Kyoka, where are the villains coming from? She nodded, clearly dissatisfied with his answers, before putting one of her jacks in the floor below them. Over there. Okay. Momo, can we get some weapons? A katana for Kyoka, I won't need anything. Sparks flew out of his mouth once more, and Izuku mentally cursed himself. Momo probably didn't notice, as she was already handing a katana to Kyoka, who was once again looking at him in confusion. How did you? I'm a psychic, Kyoka. On your left. Black Whip slithered out again, wrapping itself around a villain's throat before Izuku flipped the whip, raising the man, probably an electric quirk, if the support items meant anything, in the air and throwing him into the plaza. Eventually, they were all back to back, but it was fine. No one had been injured yet, and Izuku had sent a couple glances down to the plaza to see that Aizawa was still fine. The Numu was still by Shigaraki's side, and the manchild had yet to lift a finger. Good. Izuku clocked one of the villains across the jaw, putting just 1% of Ofa in the punch so that the man flew back, bringing down 3 of his last allies. Turning back, he saw Kyoka using her jacks as a distraction before knocking out her last villain with a fist, and Momo sweeping low with her bow staff, getting 2 villains' legs and bringing them down with 2 vicious kicks. We're done, right? Momo was clearly starting to feel tired, and Kyoka didn't look like she could hold on for too long either. Yeah, there are no more villains here. We just need to get down now. Izuku nodded. I can carry you with Black Whip. Hold tight. The familiar black thread wrapped itself around the 2 girls' waists, holding them safely, before Izuku turned on float, flying down the mountain and approaching the edge of the plaza, where Tsuyu was just getting closer with Minoru and Denki. If the frog girl's expression meant anything, the grape had tried something perverted. Izuku would have to talk with him. Stay here. I'm going to help Aizawa. Izuku, you can't. We should be helping the others escape. Momo's tone was worried, no, scared, but he knew that the situation wasn't looking too good, and that if he didn't help, consequences would be dire. Go. Trust me, okay? I promise I can do this, and I'll be back safely. I don't know what it is with you today, Izuku, but you're not going there alone. Izuku mentally sighed, turning to look at Kyoka before grabbing her hands. He saw her stiffen a bit and blush. I know you're worried, Kyoka. I know what I'm doing, even if it might not look like it. I promise I do. The purplet looked him in the eyes for a moment, before nodding. Fine. But if you get hurt I swear I'll punch you. Izuku smiled. Deal. Izuku took a deep breath, leaving the purplet's hands and jumping towards the Numu, just as, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Shigaraki talking to the hulking beast. The black thing made a slight movement, and Izuku knew that he didn't have enough time to reach it. I had a lot of fun today, thank you both for your time. That's right. He was doing this for them. Izuku felt the heat rising from his throat, and he didn't hold it back, this time. Shigaraki barely had time to jump out of the way before a veritable amount of fire rushed onto the Numu, its agonizing screams filling the plaza. Izuku cleared his mouth with the back of his hand from the few remaining sparks before clicking his tongue. Fire breath had its uses, but it always left some small burns if one didn't get rid of the sparks immediately. You're that green brat from yesterday. Izuku's attention moved to Shigaraki as the Numu slowly started regenerating. Hello, Tamura Shigaraki. I would say that it's nice to meet you, but I hate this day with a burning passion, and you're the main reason why I hate it. I'll say it once, get the F out of this facility, if you value your hands. The light-haired man looked at him with evident hatred. Now, that's not very heroic, even for a low-leveled NPC like you. Numu, destroy that brat. Izuku turned his attention back to the hulking beast, only to see it still struggling to get up. He was almost done with regeneration. Izuku could feel the quirk humming in the monster's skin. Oh, that's not a bad idea. He reached out mentally, grabbing regeneration and pulling it back. The Numu's skin stopped growing back, leaving a lot of scarred tissue, and the creature screamed again. Now, Shigaraki. That's no way to address your worst enemy. Another wave of fire washed over the Numu, who screamed in pain once more, on the floor. Its legs were too burned to hold him up, and he vaguely looked like Johnny. Izuku spit out a single spark, which landed by his shoe, before clicking his tongue. In that exact moment, the door slammed open. Fear not, students. The loud voice coming from the stairs made Izuku smile, as he straightened back up. Know why? That voice was lacking its usual cheerful note, but it made sense, considering the situation they were in. Because I am here. The symbol of peace was standing in front of the entrance, and he was looking FING said. After All Might arrived, the battle was basically over. Kurojiiri used the confusion after the symbol's arrival to warp Shigaraki away, following him in tow. The Numu was basically useless without its legs, so Izuku used Black Whip to knock it out, while All Might took care of saving the few kids that were still stuck in some zones. Eraserhead started evacuating his classmates and 13, who had still been injured during the scattering, unfortunately. Anchor's heat didn't make itself known, this time. The weekend was a blur, for Izuku. His mom fussed over him, obviously, insisting on checking him over and making him Katsudon. He let her have this, in part because he didn't entirely mind, in part because he couldn't have stopped her if he tried, with how tired he was. They were given the following day off, so that the faculty members could address the situation in a private meeting. It was just like the first time. It felt like so much time had passed, since then. Someone knocked at their door, and Izuku got up to open it. He didn't expect to be met with tired eyes and, slightly behind, his mentor's gaunt appearance. Problem child. We'd like to speak with your mother, if she's available. Izuku could only nod, letting them in the apartment as his mom came to see what was going on. The principal has implemented a dorm system that the students can join. We're worried about their safety, obviously, and we feel that keeping them on campus would be a safer alternative, especially since many students don't have parents with combative training. This is weird. The dorms weren't introduced until Katsuki had been kidnapped, last time. And this time almost no one had been injured, only 13. Why would they? Oh, right. He'd talked with Nizu and informed him of the dangers of the situation. Of course the stoat would try to avoid any extra damage. His mom was fine with the idea. I'm not home much, since my job keeps me occupied sometimes late into the day, so I have to agree that keeping Izuku on campus would be the better option. Are there any documents I have to sign? Aizawa nodded, taking out a couple sheets of paper, as All Might, still in his gaunt form, stood up. Mrs. Midoriya, if you wouldn't mind, could I speak with your son privately for a moment? Weird. She let them go immediately, and Izuku took Yagi in his room. Wow. That's quite an amount of merchandise you have, young Midoriya. Izuku felt some heat rising on his cheeks. Thanks, All Might. So, what is it? The man had a serious face. Aizawa told me you incinerated that bioweapon's legs. We both know that's not a Quirkin one for all. What was that? At least he wasn't beating around the bush, that's for sure. Now Izuku had to lie to him if he didn't want to expose his unwilling relationship to All for One. Or maybe. That's my father's quirk, if my memory serves me right. It's called fire breath. I wasn't aware I could use it until yesterday. It's possible that my diagnosis was botched or just wrong. It wasn't a lie. Fire breath did, at one point, belong to All for One, until the man gave it off to one of his many pawns to kill Izuku. The Greenette had taken it away from the villain just before knocking them out. It was the first quirk he'd ever stolen. It was also vague enough that it would ring as true if Tsukachi asked about it. Yagi seemed to buy it line, hook and sinker, as he nodded, smiling. Oh, that's amazing, my boy. This is even more power you can use in your rise to being the greatest hero we all know you can be. Izuku smiled at his mentor, a small thing that barely moved his lips at all. Thank you, All Might. Luckily I got this and not my mother's quirk, as that would have been much harder to hide as part of my quirk. He'd registered his quirk as energy, this time. It could cover most of the quirks hidden in One for All, as well as some of the ones he'd taken from villains. They started moving in on Saturday, and Izuku wasn't that surprised when he saw he was the first one in the dorms. Aizawa was waiting in front of the dorms with his usual exhausted expression in place. Midoriya. I should probably put you in detention for what you did at the USJ, but considering how helpful it was, I'll just say this, thank you, and please don't do that again. Izuku smiled at his teacher. I'll try my best, sir. May I have my dorm key? I'll go set up my room early. The man nodded, handing him a keycard and sending him on his way to pick a room. Apparently the rooms weren't assigned this time, which was another interesting development. The room was empty, but Izuku still sighed contently after entering. It wasn't going to be an All Might shrine like last time, but it felt good to be back. Hopefully he'd manage to enjoy the room more, instead of having to run away and become a vigilante. Hopefully he'd manage to deal with Shigaraki and All for One before Kamino, or at least before Jaku. He went downstairs shortly afterwards, and he immediately got tackled in a hug by one purple-haired person. Keikyoka? Shut the F up, you idiot. He smiled, hugging her back and rubbing her back. She soon started shaking, one of her few tells before she started crying, and Izuku took the warning to move them in a more secluded area, knowing how much she didn't like to be seen crying. He was still good at reading her, apparently, as she started crying as soon as they were in a hidden enough area. She punched his chest a couple of times, not saying anything, and he just held her close. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to worry you. Kyoka kept crying, silent tears rolling down her face as her hand gripped the front of his blazer. It took some time for her to calm down, but eventually she took a deep breath, looking up at Izuku. Don't you dare pull a ST stunt like that again, Izuku. He smiled at her, cupping her cheek. I'll try not to, Kyoka. The purplet blushed, but leaned in his touch nonetheless. Izuku took another couple of moments to comfort Kyoka, before getting out of the closet with her so close she might have been his shadow. Katsuki walked in shortly after, looking at Izuku only to approach him and slap him on the back of his head. What the F was that, you idiot? Izuku smiled sheepishly. Sorry, Kaken. There wasn't another way out, trust me. The explosive blonde just stared at him for a moment, before sighing and nodding. I believe you, but that was FING stupid and you know it. Whatever. The blonde shoved past him and Kyoka, climbing up the stairs to go set up his room, and Izuku barely had time to follow him with his eyes before another voice called to him. Izuku! Oh, how dare you do that? Momo knocked into him, hugging him so tightly he could barely breathe. Momo! Air! She released slightly the hold on him, but didn't let him go. He sighed, mentally accepting that he was going to once again worry the people around him, and hugged her back. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to worry you girls. It was the only way, however. The only way to what? Risk getting yourself killed? Izuku turned slightly to look at Kyoka, who was staring at him with an unimpressed look in her eyes. No, to make sure no one else got hurt. And I had it handled. I took care of the Numu before it could do anything harmful to Aizawa-sensei. Momo let him go, putting her hands on his shoulders. Izuku, listen to me. As much as your heroic spirit is valued here, we are still students. No one expects us to save everyone around us, not for another couple of years, and certainly not on our first week. And that would have been right, if Izuku hadn't been an almost pro for a whole year. That would have been right, if Izuku didn't have the greatest legacy of the world on his shoulders. That would have been right for anyone else, but not for Izuku. He smiled at her. You're right, of course. I'm sorry. I'll try my best not to worry either of you like this ever again. Momo scanned his face with a serious expression, before her features softened in a smile and she wrapped him in another hug, which he returned. Kyoka eventually shuffled her way in the hug, and Izuku couldn't help but wonder, even after all this time, at how they seemed to fit together that perfectly, like pieces of a puzzle. A smile made its way on his face as he soaked in the heat of the two people he loved the most. Maybe he could take some time to rest, today. Izuku woke up with a strangled scream halfway through his throat, tears already flowing from his eyes. A nightmare. Nothing more. This was what it was, just a nightmare. Momo was still alive, she hadn't been impaled, she wouldn't be impaled. Kyoka hadn't had her skull crushed by black hands, she wouldn't die. Katsuki was still alive, probably sleeping, since Izuku's alarm clock says that it's 3 a.m. Izuku started taking in deep breaths, before hearing someone knock at his door. He stood up, slowly walking towards the door and opening it enough to see Momo in her pajama on the other side of the door. Hi. His voice was raspy, and his throat hurt a bit. That scream had done a bit of damage. Hello, Izuku, Is everything okay? Izuku cleared his throat, wincing slightly at the pain. Of course. Why? She sent him a disbelieving look before answering. Because there are tear tracks on your cheeks, and your voice is hoarse. Did something happen? And he couldn't stop worrying them, could he? Because even with all his quirks, he was still a Deku. He cleared his cheeks, flashing her a smile. Nightmares. After what we've been through, I think most of us will have them. What about you, Momo? Is everything okay? She started nodding, before shaking her head. Not really, no. I've had some nightmares too, and I thought that maybe if I checked up on you, they'd go away. Izuku smiled again, a softer and smaller thing. I see. Thank you, Momo. Would you like to come downstairs for some tea with me? We can call Kyoka too, if you want. The Ravenet nodded. Yes, if you wouldn't mind. I checked up on her a moment ago, she didn't seem to fare much better than either of us. Izuku took a moment to fetch a couple of hoodies before softly clicking his door shut, leading Momo to Kyoka's room. The purplet opened a few seconds after they'd knocked. Momo, I'm fine, Izuku? He smiled at her. Hey. Momo and I are getting a cup of tea to calm down after some nightmares, do you want to join us? A beat of silence passed, and Kyoka nodded, walking out in her own sleeping clothes, shivering slightly. It's colder than I thought out here. Izuku handed her a black hoodie. Here. I thought this might happen. Kyoka blushed slightly, but took the hoodie nonetheless. I've also taken one for you, Momo. I hope it will fit. He handed her a red hoodie, one of the few nondescript ones he owned, and the Ravenet took it gratefully, a small blush appearing on her cheeks. The hoodies fit properly. It was a bit looser for Kyoka and a bit tighter for Momo, but they didn't seem to mind, and he didn't either. He'd always found them cute anyways, regardless of their clothes. The tea was in front of them after a couple of minutes, and as they were sitting at the table, Izuku sighed. I owe you an explanation, for my quirk. Momo and Kyoka were looking at him immediately afterwards. He knew he couldn't lie to them, and he would trust them with his life, but he didn't want to share certain parts of what he'd done. One for All secret came out, that night, just like All for One's did. The two powers Izuku owned, and the quirks hidden in either of them. He didn't talk about Encore, but he covered all the other quirks. My quirk is, officially, registered as energy. For the records, it is just a powerful stockpiling quirk that collects energy and that allows me to use that energy in whatever way I want, be it to power myself up or to emulate some other quirks. Momo and Kyoka were left speechless. I know that it's hard to believe, and I won't blame you if I believe you. Kyoka was the first one to recover. You know that my Quirk, earphone jack, allows me to hear a lot better than most people do. Something I learned how to do quite early is how to understand if someone's lying by listening to their heartbeat, plus their body language and facial expressions help a lot. You're not lying, Izuku, even though this feels absurd. I believe you. Izuku looked at her silently. She believed him last time, too. I believe you as well, Izuku. Momo's voice caught his attention, making him turn slightly to look at her. As Kyoka said, this is quite absurd, but you've proven yourself to be incredibly trustworthy. I see no reason not to believe you. Izuku stared at the girls in front of him, blinking back tears, and he felt his heart swell with love for both of them once more. Things would get better. He would make sure of it. Izuku slowly started coming back to the waking world as some light filtered through the partially closed blinds. He'd forgot to close them, again. It wasn't uncommon, since Momo died he'd been forgetting a lot of things. He just sighed, holding Kyoka closer. They'd probably put another pillow in the bed, since he could feel something soft pressing on his back. Hold on. Izuku slowly opened his eyes, only to see Kyoka between his arms. That was expected. What wasn't expected was the realization that a pair of arms was holding him still in an embrace, and that this wasn't the bedroom of the apartment they'd bought, it was Momo's dorm room. Right. Nightmares. They'd had tea, and he'd shared most of his secrets with them. Momo was the first one to fall asleep, and he'd brought her back to bed. Before either he or Kyoka could try to get away, however, Momo's hands had grabbed one wrist each, dragging them both into bed. Which left them in their current situation, as Izuku was being spooned by Momo while holding Kyoka, whose face was hidden in his chest, as she always did. Or will do. Izuku tightened his hold on her, using Black Whip to check his phone. It was barely 7 a.m., most of the class would be sleeping, probably. He could rest some more. Izuku closed his eyes, sighing happily and postponing any issues with his sleeping position for another hour at the very least. Or at least, that's what he was hoping for, as while he was checking the time on his phone, he felt Momo's hold on him tighten slightly. She'd always been a cuddler, and neither Izuku or Kyoka had ever minded in the slightest, especially after what they'd been through because of the villains. Izuku took one arm off of Kyoka's shoulders, holding her tightly with her other arm, and moved it so that he could hold one of Momo's hands. This, however, made her jolt slightly, to which he quietly whispered to her. "Shh. It's me, Momo. It's Izuku." The girl's breath slowed down, and she just pressed further against his back. "Get back to sleep, it's still early." She muttered some sort of affirmation, and Izuku had to bite his own tongue back in order to avoid telling her that he loved her. The following morning started out quietly. Izuku woke up to Kyoka hiding her face in his chest to avoid being seen blushing, and to Momo still holding him, probably still asleep. He just combed his fingers through Kyoka's hair, still holding one of Momo's hands, until his alarm started ringing, a quiet melody that slowly shook Momo out of her slumber. Izuku turned it off shortly afterwards, but didn't move much until the girl stirred more. "Morning beautifuls." Izuku felt them both freeze for a moment, and chuckled at that. He still knew how to push their buttons, it seemed. Morning, Izuku, Kyoka." Momo was the first one to snap out of it, choking out her words with a higher voice than usual, followed shortly after by Kyoka's morning, which was more of a mumbling sound than actual, coherent words. It took them all a couple minutes to wake up completely, recall the previous night's events and, calmly, make their way downstairs, where Izuku made breakfast for all of them. Homeroom was filled with a kind of tense energy, not unlike the kind of energy that had filled it so many years ago, but this time, the anxiety subsided immediately as Aizawa walked in the room completely unscathed, bar one band-aid over his cheek, where he'd been scratched by a villain. "All right, Hell class, settle down. I have an important announcement to make." Their teacher took a moment to take in their faces, and Izuku knew it was just so that he could savor the moment of tension that Denki and Mina were feeling. "In less than a month we'll be having the sports festival. Your chance to show the world that you're here. You'll still attend classes regularly in the morning, and you'll have the afternoons and the weekends available to train. Any questions?" "Yes, Kaminari?" The electric blonde lowered his hand and cleared his throat. "Sir, is it really a good idea to hold the sports festival after?" He didn't need to say what he was thinking about, every single one of them immediately caught on. Aizawa sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Nizu didn't want to hold the festival, but we received pressures from the Hero Commission. The principal eventually agreed with their demands, but only on the condition that they jacked up the security to 100 and got the entire top 10 either to patrol or be in the audience." The class had mostly quieted down, but this revelation immediately sent them all back in a high state of excitement, that Aizawa allowed to exist for 6 entire seconds. He was going soft. In the first timeline he would have stopped them in 3 seconds, before activating his quirk and glaring at them, shutting them all up. You have 3 weeks to prepare. You can do it however you want, just don't get too hurt, take proper breaks and don't ignore your schoolwork. Did I make myself clear? A cheesy chorus of "Yes, Aizawa-sensei" filled the silence, making their teacher nod and actually start that day's lesson. By the time Friday had come, Izuku felt exhausted, but he also felt incredibly satisfied with his progress. He'd managed to draw out 8% of One for All's power, which was a definite improvement from his previous performance with the quirk, although, to be honest, just not breaking his own bones was an improvement. He'd taken some time to hone his analysis better, taking notes over his friend's quirks and abilities, eventual weaknesses, and how to exploit them. The hard part was going to be getting through Shudo's thick skull, again. Ugh. Izuku loudly groaned, running his hands through his hair and pulling lightly at a couple of knots. Is something the matter, Izuku? Momo. Of course she'd heard him. He sighed, laying his back against the couch. Nothing, I'm just worried about Todoroki. He won't use half of his quirk. Momo nodded, sitting next to him. If he doesn't snap out of it, that's gonna get him killed on the field. But of course he has to be stubborn like that, one of the only traits he inherited from the flaming trash can. Izuku stopped ranting when he heard the Ravenette snort beside him, and he turned to see her giggling quietly. His heart fluttered for a long moment in which Izuku fell for her all over again. Would you like to go on a date with me, tomorrow? We can invite Kyoka too, if you want, or it can just be the two of us. Momo had stopped giggling, and Izuku felt like kicking himself for a moment. God's DMN him, he was still too impulsive. I'd love to. And I'd like for Kyoka to be there too. Izuku smiled, nodding. Me, hey, Kyo. Are you free tomorrow afternoon? Her purple hotness, sure. Why? Wanna go on a date with me and Momo? They heard a weird sound, similar to someone falling off a bed, as well as a loud shriek. She got the message, and I would assume that it's a yes, but I'm going to wait for a written answer. Momo giggled at that, and Izuku had to take a series of deep breaths to resist the urge to just turn and kiss her. His phone pinged, however, holding him back from these ideas. Her purple hotness, sure. I mean, I don't mind, I was doing nothing anyways. Me, cool, 3 p.m. in the common room, wear casual clothes. Momo likes your cardigan, BTW. So do I, but that's less relevant RN. A muffled, "You're killing me, Izuku," came down from the stairs, which made Izuku chuckle. She said yes. We're meeting here at 3 p.m. tomorrow, if that's fine with you. Momo just nodded as Izuku made to get up. Ah, right, one more thing. You should wear those black leggings and that cream-colored sweater. Kyoka liked them both, and I can't say I didn't feel the same way. Good night. Another strangled scream, this time from behind him, alerted him that he'd managed to fluster both of his girls. Izuku went through Saturday morning the same way he usually did, early morning run, which this morning Tenya joined, which reminded him that he'd have to go get rid of Stain before the man hurt Tenya's brother, followed by some stretching, a shower, then breakfast. Then some homework, even though Izuku was very much on top of his classes, giving Momo a run for her position as number 1 in the class. Midway through it, however, a thought hit him. What the F was he going to wear? I could ask Kaken for some help, if he's willing to listen to me. Or maybe Shudo. No, we're not that close yet, it wouldn't work. He'd probably just tell me to. Huh? Izuku's phone pinged in that moment. My fave Pikachu, Mido. Open your door, I wanna talk WU. Huh? He must have been way too distracted to not notice Denki knocking. Opening the door, Izuku found himself faced with the familiar electric blonde's face. Hey Cammy. Come in, what's up? Not much Mido, what's up with you? Denki made his way in Izuku's room as if he owned the place, which wasn't completely false, given how much time Izuku spent chatting with him outside of class. He'd also had Denki in there a couple of times already to help him with maths and chemistry. I'm good Cammy, just a bit anxious. I'm going out later and I'm not sure what to wear. The blonde nodded, smiling at him. I've heard. You asked Yamamo and Jairu out in front of a bunch of people, hell, Mina was in the kitchen, and you know how she is. Izuku smiled sheepishly, rubbing the back of his head. Ops, I didn't even notice her. Yeah, you were too busy staring into Yamamo's eyes. Cammy. The blonde chuckled at that, raising his hands as if to surrender. I'm messing with you. So, want some help picking clothes? I'm actually pretty good at this, or so my sister tells me. Sure, if you don't have anything else to do, I would appreciate it. Izuku could safely say that he was stunned. Not physically, Denki hadn't lost control over his quirk, but just mentally. The white turtleneck was a bit tight, but not uncomfortably so, and the color change to the darker jeans wasn't as jarring as Izuku thought it would be. As for the black shoes, Izuku was a bit worried that they wouldn't fit because of his extra toe joint, but apparently Denki had an extra pair and wore shoes slightly bigger than Izuku's, so it was fine. Okay, first of all, what the F dash? Secondly, why aren't you a model or a fashion designer? Denki chuckled at that, admiring his handiwork. Thanks dude. And it's mostly because that's what my sister will do, I will model for her once I go pro. Izuku turned to look at him in surprise. He'd honestly never asked Denki about his family in all those years. You have a sister? That's so cool. Is she older than you? Nope. We're twins. That's probably why neither are straight, to be fair, we probably switched SXL orientation at birth. Izuku chuckled at that, and Denki cracked a smile of his own. That's pretty cool. I'm an only child, unfortunately. Well, while it was technically a lie, Izuku couldn't possibly know at this time that Tamura was his adoptive sibling, so it wasn't actually a lie. Hey, Cammy, can I ask you something? Sure thing dude, go for it. You said you and your sister switched SXL orientation, does that mean you're gay? The electric blonde nodded, smiling. Yup. Why's that? Nothing, I thought you had a thing for Kyoka, to be honest. Nah. Jairu's like, my best friend, my platonic soulmate, I've known her since middle school. Also, she's very much into you and Yamamo, even though I'm not supposed to say this. Izuku smiled. He knew this, of course, but it didn't hurt to have some reassurances every now and then. Thanks Cammy. Both for telling me that and for the makeover. You're welcome Mito. And feel free to call me Denki, for some reason it feels like we've known each other for years. Then you can call me Izuku, or Aizu, or whatever. Izuku had lunch with the class before going and getting changed in the outfit Denki had helped him pick. Before doing that, however, he went to Aizawa to ask for permission to go out on this date, and the man agreed, as long as they were back before curfew. So there he was now, waiting on the common room couch until the design time hit. Wow Midori, you're looking good. You going somewhere? Mina's voice shook him out of his thoughts, and he turned to smile at her. I actually am, I have a date in a bit. Her eyes widened like saucers, and she was beside him on the couch in a moment. Who's the lucky person? Spill. Izuku chuckled. Aha, a gentleman never kisses and tells. Besides, you'll probably see them in a bit. And, right on cue, he heard some footsteps coming from the elevators, and he turned to see Kyoka and Momo. Hey ladies. Shall we? Izuku got up from the couch, placing himself between his ladies and offering one arm to each of them, leaving Mina completely dumbfounded. The girls weren't faring much better, to be fair, they were staring at him as if he was an alien, or something similar. Why you're looking great, Izuku. Momo nodded at Kyoka's affirmation, and Izuku smiled. Thank you. You look amazing too. Although you always do, to be honest. And, just like that, he walked out with two blushing girls on his arms. He could vaguely hear Mineta dying from jealousy, which reminded him that he'd have to deal with the pervert after the date. Tomorrow. Today was for enjoying his time with Kyoka and Momo. They were well away from UA campus when Momo and Kyoka started recovering from Izuku being way too smooth for anyone's good. So, Izuku, what are we doing? Izuku turned to flash a blinding smile to the Ravenet on his right side. I'm not sure, to be honest. I was thinking we could go watch some movie, preferably not horror ones, since Kyoka doesn't like them, but other than that I didn't really have any plans, and I wanted to ask you girls if you wanted to do something in particular. Momo nodded, and Izuku turned slightly to see Kyoka blushing again. Dude, how do you know all this stuff? He's a psychic, Kyoka. Izuku turned to look at Momo with a betrayed expression, as the Ravenet giggled. Come on Aizu, you can't really think we won't tease you a bit for this. Besides, I'm still not convinced that you're actually a psychic, I think you have a quirk for that. Izuku smiled cryptically. Momo had no idea how right she was, but he wasn't going to say so for a while. Or ever, if he could avoid it. Not my fault you're not willing to believe that I could just be psychic. Anyways, what do you want to do, aside from a movie? Kyoka squeezed his hand lightly, and he turned to look at her. Maybe we could go back to that cat cafe? I'm in the mood for their red velvet. And we could pick a movie to watch from there? The cinema isn't that far from there, after all. Izuku turned to look at Momo, silently asking for her thoughts, receiving a smile in response. I wouldn't mind spending some time in that cafe, especially since they have such a delightful selection of sweets. That is, if Aizu doesn't have different plans. The greenette shook his head, smiling softly. I'm all for your plan, girls. They took what, for Izuku, had become their usual booth, and placed their orders as Izuku took out his phone and opened the cinema's website with Kyoka, who was already nestled under one of his arms. They waited until Momo had taken a similar position on Izuku's other side before starting to scroll through the various new releases. So, this one is that horror remake from the pre-Quirk era dash. Please, can we avoid horror movies? I really don't like them, especially in cinemas. Of course Kyo, no problem. Let's see, they've made another Fast and Furious. Will they ever stop? It doesn't seem likely, Izu. Oh, that's the sequel to that romance movie that came out 2 years ago. Izuku turned to look at Momo with a quirked eyebrow. I didn't peg you as the person who liked this kind of romantic movies. She started to stutter out an answer, and Izuku felt his heart swell with affection, as well as his face hurting a bit for the strain of holding up his poker face. That is, until one of Kyoka's jacks poked his side, making him slip up and chuckle slightly. Don't worry Momo, he's just messing with you. This jackass already knew you like cheesy romance movies and novels. Izuku shook his head fondly. You got me. That's what I get for trying to lie to your quirk, Kyo. But yeah Momo, I knew, and I don't mind. I actually enjoy some of them myself, you know, with me being considered quirkless until a couple months back and all that stuff. He felt Kyoka's arm tighten slightly around himself, but he didn't comment on it, just holding the girls a bit tighter. We still have to pick a movie, come on. They ended up settling on one remake of an old pre-Quirk comedy about a man who could speak with animals. Izuku found it entertaining, and it reminded him of Koda's Quirk. Now that I think about it, we could remake this movie with Koda as the main actor. Kyoka started giggling at the idea, followed shortly after by Momo's open laughter. He followed them in that laughter after a couple of seconds, losing himself in that beautiful sound. He truly loved them both. Izuku once again promised himself that he'd do the impossible to keep moments like these in their futures. They stopped at a small restaurant for dinner, after Aizawa had given Izuku the okay for that. Curfew wouldn't be until 10 p.m., and it was barely 7 p.m., but Izuku still wanted to avoid any issues from his teacher class dad. Because that's what Aizawa was, the class dad. Momo insisted that she would foot the bill. We can all pay our part, Momo. Nonsense Kyo, I asked you two out, I'm paying. You already paid for the cinema and the cat cafe, Izu. Let me do this, and they had to relent, eventually. The walk back to campus was mostly quiet, as the three students held hands and just basked in the feeling of being together. Izuku couldn't know what the other two were thinking, but for him, it was moments like these that made him feel that it was worth it. He walked the girls back to their rooms, getting a goodnight kiss from each one of them on his cheeks and giving them both one of his own, before heading back to his own room to get changed. No need to get grape juice on a good turtleneck, after all. A few minutes later, after exchanging the form-fitting jeans and turtlenecks for some baggy shorts and a t-shirt with the word villain on it, Izuku was knocking on Minetta's door. Open up, Minetta. I know you're not sleeping, we need to talk. As soon as the door opened, just slightly, Izuku pushed through, opening it enough to slam the purple pervert away, only to close it as soon as the greenette had made his way in. Once again, Izuku made sure to channel his SPRM donor in that moment, or as much of his aura as he could. Good evening, Minetta. I hope you weren't doing anything important. Oh, the grape was already shaking. And no, Midoriya. What's up? Izuku smiled. It was usually a warm sight to see that smile, something that made you feel as if the sun was shining a bit brighter, but something was off this time. That smile didn't reach Izuku's eyes properly, leaving them devoid of any and all warmth, just some cold and calculative poisonous orbs. Oh, not much, I just wanted to talk with you, you know, to clear a bit of a rumor I've heard. Izuku took a step forward, and the grape took a step back. A little bird told me that something very interesting happened at the USJ, during the attack. Another step forward. You wouldn't happen to know what I'm talking about, would you? Step forward. And no, Midoriya. What is it? Step forward. Minetta's back was flat against a wall. Oh, that's curious. Izuku acted on his best impression of someone who was genuinely confused. Because I'm pretty sure I heard that, while Tsuyu was helping you away from the flood zone, you took the opportunity to grope her. If Izuku was radiating a cold aura before those words, afterwards it was as if Shudo had encased the room in an iceberg, and Izuku knew that it was just the effect he wanted to have. The purple pervert flinched when Izuku knelt down to his level. Now, I like giving people second opportunities. God knows I've been given plenty in my life, so it would be a bit hypocritical of me to not do the same, wouldn't you agree? Minetta nodded frantically. Hell, Izuku could have probably told him that the sky was green and the pervert would have agreed, praying for a chance to be away from the greenette's wrath. So, then, consider this a warning. If you pull another shitty stunt like that, Mineta, it will be your last one. A beat of silence followed. I may not be allowed to kill you, Mineta, but know this, I will go to Nizu. I have him on speed dial for instances like this one. He will know about this and all previous instances of you being a sexist, homophobic piece of shit. You will be expelled and sued. Izuku leaned a bit closer, just to make sure that the grape's attention was still on him. Did I make myself clear, Mineta? The purple pervert nodded again, so fast that Izuku wondered if his head would fall off. After that confirmation, however, Izuku smiled warmly again, and the cold aura vanished. Wonderful. I'm glad we had this conversation. Now, I'm going to go to sleep, and I suggest you do the same. Good night, Mineta. He stood back up, stretching for a moment, before walking out of the pervert's room and back into his own. Hopefully this would be enough. Otherwise, the consequences would be much more dire. The sports festival was approaching rapidly, and Izuku, while tired, could safely say that he was proud of where he was with his quirk. He could safely use about 10% of One for All's power, pushing it to 15% in moments of crisis, and he was able to mostly avoid crashing into things while speeding around with full cowling. Mostly. Which is how he ended up in Recovery Girl's office for the third time in as many weeks. Honestly, Midoriya, if it weren't for the fact that you have yet to explode your arms, I would have kicked your butt. Izuku just smiled at Recovery Girl as she finished checking him over. Thanks, madam, I appreciate the restraint. She handed him a pack of gummies while muttering a cheeky brat, before going back to another student. Izuku took the opportunity to make a phone call to a well-familiar number. Oh, young Midoriya. To what do I owe the pleasure? Principal Nizu. If I were to drop by your office in, say, 15 minutes, could you get Eraserhead there? There's something I need to do, and I can't do it without being accused of vigilantism unless Aizawa is with me. The principal chuckled at that. Sure, feel free to drop by. I'll let Recovery Girl know to let you come over, and Aizawa will be here by the time you're here. I'll see you later. This was going to be a shitty idea. This is the shittiest idea I've heard in way too many years at UA, Midoriya. Nizu, let me expel him on basis of mental instability. The principal just chuckled, and Izuku smiled. Of course Aizawa reacted like that. Sir, as much as I agree with Aizawa, allow me to explain. The stoat made a small gesture with his hand, as if to allow him to continue, and Izuku nodded. So, as I've told you more times than I'm willing to count, I'm from the future. Well, when I'm from, Ingenium gets attacked by Stain during the sports festival, and Tenya Ida goes on a vigilante quest to avenge his brother, landing himself in a decent amount of harm and requiring me and Shudo Todoroki to save his butt. We capture Stain, the credit is given to Endeavor, everyone lives happily ever after, except Tenya who now has damaged his right hand to the point of needing surgery. I want to avoid this scenario by capturing Stain early, and hopefully catching a FING break during my internship. Since I can't, legally, go after Stain on my own, even though I have more than enough quirks to get him alone, I need a pro hero with me. So we can pass it as Eraserhead bringing me on a patrol to see how it works. I have no idea why he would do that, and that's why I'm asking for your help, Principal, I'm not a bureaucrat. Aizawa sighed loudly, but Nizu's smile said enough. You have to admit that he thought this through, Aizawa. He did, but that doesn't change the fact that Stain is in Hosu, a good 3 hours away from here, and the sports festival is on Monday. Actually, sir, Hosu is 15 seconds away from here. Nizu and Aizawa turned to look at him in confusion. You see, in my year I spent being a vigilante, I picked up a couple of nifty quirks. One of these is basically a teleport quirk, which allows me to go anywhere in the world with whoever is currently touching me. Both Izuku and Nizu turned to look at Aizawa, who sighed in exasperation and nodded. Fine. We're leaving at 9 p.m. sharp. Leave your keycard somewhere safe, and be in your hero costume. Izuku thought he could almost hear Aizawa's muttering of problem child as he left the room. That was going to be an interesting night. Izuku had almost been able to walk out of the dorms unnoticed, courtesy of a stealth quirk he'd picked up, when Kyoka noticed him. Because of course she did. Izuku? Where are you going? Also, why are you in hero costume? He turned around, smiling at her. Hey Kyo! Aizawa-sensei asked for me, he said to be there in hero costume, something about wanting to show me how to practice better situational awareness, I'm not entirely sure. I should be back sometime tonight, or maybe tomorrow morning, depending on how much he keeps me up. That was a lie, obviously, but something that Izuku had learned in his years with Kyoka was that, if he was careful enough while sidestepping around the truth, it wouldn't make his heartbeat change too much. Hopefully he could chalk it up to being startled when Kyoka suddenly called him. The purplet looked at him for another couple of seconds before getting closer and hugging him. "Kay, be careful. We still have a movie night tomorrow, right?" Izuku hugged her back. "Yup, Momo's room at 9 p.m. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Izuku took particular pride in startling Aizawa out of his thoughts. Now, sir, we need to work on situational awareness." The tired man stared at him for a second before sighing. "Fine, you got me. Are we going now?" Izuku nodded, holding out a hand to his teacher before closing his eyes and focusing on Hosu. Unlike Warp Gate or other similar quirks, he didn't require specific coordinates to go somewhere. He just needed to know the approximate location of a place or a person to appear in a 500 meters radius of them. Which is exactly how, 15 seconds later, Izuku and Aizawa appeared with a quiet pop on a rooftop, in Hosu, just 15 meters away from the hero killer, who was brooding on the edge of the same rooftop. Izuku's usual rotten luck, of course. Hero killer Stain, I assume. The man turned around, almost startled, before focusing on them. Eraserhead. And, who are you? Izuku smiled. It had been a while since he'd last seen Agakuro, and he still felt somewhat in debt after the man had taken a knife to the throat to save him from Himiko Toga, but it didn't matter now. "I'm Atlas, sir. Nice to meet you, and sorry. We kind of have to arrest you to avoid you hurting a couple good pro heroes, as well as friends of mine. No hard feelings." Izuku wasn't sure if Aizawa wanted to kill him more than Stain did, in that moment, but he didn't really care much. "You? Arrest me? How old are you, kid?" 15. Izuku just smiled, although it was hidden behind his mouthpiece. "That's for me to know, and for no one else to find out." The serial killer took a step forward, only to immediately slip and fall flat on his face as the strand of black whip he'd put his foot on suddenly came back to Izuku. "Get his but Eraserhead!" Surprisingly, Stain didn't get up from that position as quickly as Izuku thought he would. Unsurprisingly, after not getting up, Aizawa knocked him out for good and took away his weapons before tying him with some capture tape that the man always brought on patrol. "Hey, check his boots. He had a couple of knives there too, last time." Aizawa silently nodded, checking the boots and pulling out 2 more daggers from the sides and 1 more from the heels. Hell, he surely knew how to stash his weapons. "Anything else we should be aware of, kid?" Izuku shook his head. "No, I don't think so. I called the police a couple minutes ago, they should be here any minute." And, right on cue, the police sirens cut through the night as 2 cars, escorting a small van, parked right under the building Izuku and Aizawa were sitting on. The greenette wasted no time to touch both his teacher and the hero killer, before teleporting down in the street with a quiet pop. "So, Atlas, huh?" Izuku smiled. "I mean, yeah. We've got a heavy burden to carry, Eraserhead. It only made sense to pick a moniker that could match that burden. Come on, let's not keep the detectives waiting." Then they handed Stain over to the police. "Quick and painless. The League shouldn't. What is it?" "The League won't get any new recruits, which is good for us, but bad for them. We will need to track them down." Izuku had been pacing ever since they'd teleported back to Nizu's office, his muttering too quick for anyone to pick up on. How the F did he not think of this? Honestly, taking Stain out of the equation created so many issues. Sure, the Hell class would be safe from certain villains, but some of those people were only villains for lack of alternatives. And who knows where the F? Aizawa's capture weapon locked him in place as the tired man glared at him. "Are you going to explain what's going to happen or can I go to sleep?" Izuku smiled sheepishly, trying to turn to face his small audience. "Right, I'm sorry. Something I hadn't considered, really, completely my fault, is that by removing Stain from the equation, or rather, by capturing him silently, the League can't appropriate his ideals to get more followers. This means that a number of people who would have joined the League are now up for grabs, and we either get to them first or we'll end up facing them in a number of other situations." Nizu and Aizawa seemed to catch on to what he was saying. "So it would be in our best interest to locate these people before they make any more unsavory choices, correct?" Izuku nodded. "Yes. Unfortunately, I'm not entirely sure of where we could find some of them, since there was very little information about them before they joined the League, and one of them is legally dead, but I think that we could, potentially, pick up at the very least the most important ones, if we use the next couple of months wisely. I'm going to go to sleep. Let me know what I have to look for while I'm on patrol." Aizawa walked out of the room, once again muttering something about problem children, and leaving Izuku with Nizu to collect as much information as the greenette could give about the not members of the League of Villains. Izuku yawned while waiting for the pot of coffee to finish brewing. Nizu had kept him up way later than he originally thought the principal would. Thank God it wasn't a school night. He poured himself a cup of coffee, adding way too much sugar for his own good, as well as some milk, and stirring the quickly lightening liquid with a spoon. The first sip of it always made him smile in a way very few things could, flashing him with one specific memory of when he'd finally got an apartment with Kyoka and Momo. That memory, however, was quickly pushed away from him when he felt a pair of arms tighten around his chest, holding him close. He barely turned his head, only to see a tuft of purple hair against his back. "Morning, Kyo. Coffee?" The girl mumbled some sort of affirmation, after which Izuku took out another cup, pouring her a dose of black coffee with 3 drops of milk, just like she'd always liked it. Momo would likely be down soon, but he'd wait for her to come down before putting anything up. "Did you sleep well?" He felt Kyoka nod against his head, only to hear her mumble something that sounded like she was asking him the same thing. "Yeah, I just didn't sleep long. I was done with Aizawa pretty soon, and then Nizu asked for me. He needed me to give him some information about my quirks and all that stuff, and it took us way too long." Kyoka stiffened, and Izuku mentally kicked himself. Did she pick up on his lie, or was she going to ask who else is in the know? "Nizu asked about your quirks? You told us you'd told them everything about it after the entrance exam. So it's the lie." "Yeah, I forgot I'd told you that." Izuku took another sip of coffee as Kyoka got off his back and circled around him, looking deep in his eyes. "Izuku?" He sighed. "I can't explain right now, but tonight. I promise." Kyoka looked in his eyes for another moment, looking for a hint of a lie and, satisfied with what she didn't find, she nodded, standing on her tiptoes to leave a kiss on his cheek. "Okay. I trust you." Izuku could only smile, leaning down to leave a kiss on her forehead. "Thank you. Now, what would you want for breakfast?" "I swear to God, Denks, if Ida makes me run another lap I'll kick his butt, sparring rules be dmed." Denki, the BSTRD, was just laughing beside Izuku, after handing him a bottle of water. "Well, that's your fault for being faster than him, isn't it?" Izuku flipped Denki off after making sure that Tenya wasn't looking, before chuckling at Denki's faux-shocked expression. "So, how's your quirk going?" Denki sighed, sitting down by his friend. "Not bad, but not good. I can go over my previous limit in voltage without frying myself too easily, but I still can't lead the electricity where I want it to go, you know? I'll never understand how Mom does it." Izuku nodded, somewhat understanding Denki's struggle. "Have you tried pushing it out at lower amounts? Maybe if you go at lower percentages, you can control better its direction? I had a similar struggle with my quirk, where if I used too much power I'd break my bones, but as long as I stay at low percentages." The electric blonde seemed to ponder that thought for a couple of moments, eventually nodding. "I'll have to try it. I'll go looking for Aizawa-sensei, see if he can help me try this without shocking myself silly or blacking out the dorms. Thanks Aizu, you're the best." And, with that, Denki dashed away, leaving Izuku sitting on the ground. It was a nice day, though. One of the last ones he'd managed to enjoy without too much pain, Izuku found himself thinking while marveling at his unbroken and unscarred hands. "Oi, Deku." Izuku turned around, staring at Katsuki with a curious look. "What is it, Kaken? Your FING phone is ringing." Izuku took the phone from the explosive blonde's hand, nodding as a thanks, and picked up. "Hello? Hello young Midoriya. Would you mind joining me at the gates? There seems to be someone that matches one of your descriptions." "Oh? Already? I'll be there in a couple minutes, sir." Izuku barely took the time to get his jacket from the ground before sprinting towards the UA gate. Who could it be? Dabi wasn't in this area, in theory, and Spinner would probably still be in his house, trying to find meaning in his life. Maybe twice? Hopefully not muscular, that man deserved to be run over by a truck. Hell, maybe Izuku could just sick Tamura on him and hope for the best. The stoat was waiting for Izuku in front of the gate, with a girl in front of him. She had ash blonde hair, and she was wearing some sort of middle school uniform, a bit torn, patched and dirty. Himiko Toga. "Oh, young Midoriya. This young lady just showed up, and I was wondering if you happen to know who she is." Izuku nodded, just as Toga turned to look at him. She didn't have that crazy look in her eyes yet, but it was clear that her quirk was already starting to mess with her mental stability. "Yes, sir, I do know her. Hi, Toga, right?" She stared at him with worry in her eyes, as well as some surprise. "Yes, although I'd prefer if you called me Himiko. Who are you?" Izuku smiled softly, trying to put her at ease. He'd never liked what her parents put her through, much less what she ended up putting his class through. "My name is Izuku Midoriya, hero name, Atlas. Or at least, it will be. I asked Principal Nizu, here, to find you and some other people like you, but I didn't think you'd show up this soon. Actually, Midoriya, I have yet to put out any of the flyers we made last night. She came here on her own." Izuku looked at Nizu first, then at Toga. This was weird. I'm sorry for intruding, Midoriya, Nizu, but I need help, and I didn't know where else to go. Izuku nodded, looking her over for any injuries. It's because of your quirk, right? The question was asked in a low tone of voice, barely high enough that she could hear it. She flinched at that mention. Don't worry, Himiko. No one will hurt you for that, not here. And if anyone tries, we'll defend you. Do you need some blood right now? The blonde nodded, staring at him in confusion, surprise, still a bit of worry, maybe even some shock. Very well. Principal, I'm taking Himiko to Recovery Girl's office. Send Vlad King as soon as his class lets out, if possible, and Recovery Girl herself as soon as she finishes her break. And, without even waiting for an answer, Izuku grabbed Himiko's hand, pulling her away as he took out his phone, opening a particular group chat. Raven, Violet and Green. Me, if someone tells you that I was holding hands with a blonde girl, it's true, but there's nothing between me and her. Raven Queen, I'm glad to hear so, Izu, but why this information? Her purple hotness, is this about what we talked about this morning, Izuku? Yup. I swear I'll explain everything tonight. Until then, no jealous acts. Love you both. Recovery Girl's office, for the first time in a very long time, was completely empty. Izuku wasted no time, making Himiko sit down on one of the beds before fetching some cloth to clean spilled blood later and taking a seat on a chair by her bed. Are you hurt, Himiko? She shook her head. And no, I'm just confused. What's going on? Izuku offered his arm. Here, drink. Recovery Girl will be here soon to check you for any injuries and heal them. We can talk about this entire situation later, okay? The girl just nodded, before sinking her teeth in his arm. He barely even felt it, probably because of some sort of chemical in her saliva? Oh! He'd finally have the chance to properly ask her about her quirk, without having to worry for his own or someone else's safety in battle. Izuku smiled, looking at the tired girl who was currently clinging to his arm as if it was a lifeline. Achiko would probably like Himiko, if the poor blonde wasn't blood crazy. And that term's still SCKED, but, honestly, who had the idea? Recovery Girl arrived just a couple moments after Himiko had finished drinking, while Izuku was placing a band-aid over the small holes in his arm. Midoriya, what did you do this time? He smiled brightly at the school nurse, pushing down a small feeling of disappointment. Why did she insist in thinking that he'd done something? Nothing this time, madam. I'm actually here for Himiko, here. I suspect that she might have been injured in her recent past, and she had certain quirk-related needs that she needed some help for. Izuku felt Himiko's hand squeeze his arm. Thank you, Midoriya. Who is she? The nurse immediately picked up from there. Hi dearie, I'm Recovery Girl, the school nurse. If what this hooligan's saying is true, I can heal whatever injury you've recently suffered. Can you show me where you're hurt? Himiko shook her head as a small smile appeared on her face. I'm good, thank you madam. I just need somewhere to stay that isn't with my parents. Izuku nodded, leaning towards Himiko slightly. We can help you, I promise. I'm just going to need you to tell what happened to Principal Nizu, and we'll find a way to keep them away from you and to make them face consequences. Himiko. He found himself staring in some doubtful golden eyes, which were scanning his face while trying to find any hint of a lie, only to fill with tears once she found no signs of Izuku lying to her. It was going to be a long first semester, Izuku finally realized. Izuku walked out of Nizu's office still simmering with some quiet rage. He was somewhat aware of what Himiko had gone through, obviously, but hearing it all again, and with all the unedited details? Oh, that was enough to make his blood boil. Which is how Izuku found himself in training Gym Gamma, which was unused, to hit the bag and try to push down that rage, or at least put it out in a way that didn't harm anyone else. BSTRD parents trying to make their child just deal with some urges caused by a quirk she probably didn't even want, just because it made her a bit weird. News FING flash, assholes, everyone with a quirk is FING weird. God FING DMN it, Izuku was starting to understand Katsuki's levels of anger. He'd been hitting the bag while using low levels of his quirk, but the thought of Himiko being beaten up by her parents just to force her to hide a side of her quirk made another thought come to his mind. The image of a young girl with white hair and red eyes, with scars littered all over her arms and thighs, came into his mind, and Izuku lost the tight control he usually had on One for All, unloading a punch at way higher percentages than what he was supposed to against the bag, that went soaring through the gym, only to crash against the wall. Izuku waited for his rage-fueled adrenaline to die down, for the pain to catch up to him. But it never did. His arm wasn't broken, in spite of him using way too much of Ofa's power for that punch. Something similar had happened at the USJ too, hadn't it? All those years ago. Izuku? He turned around so fast that he almost gave himself whiplash, only to see Momo looking at him with concern in her eyes. Izuku took a deep breath, pushing down what was left of his rage. "Hey, Momo." That came out more tired than he wanted it to be, and the Ravenet noticed, quickly walking towards him. "Is something the matter?" "Of course it is," Izuku thought. "My daughter is in danger and I can't do anything about it until I have my provisional license. Most of the villains we were supposed to fight are scattered in this nation on their own, which should be a good thing, but it isn't because they might be recruited by an organization with much more destructive power than what currently is the League of Villains, or worse, they might get hurt, which shouldn't worry the average hero, but they're FING people too DMN it." But he couldn't say any of that, could he? "I'm a bit stressed. I'll tell you what I can tonight, just like I told Kyoka this morning." Momo just nodded before pulling him in a hug, which he returned immediately, closing his eyes while laying his head on her shoulder. He would try his best to make it okay. The rest of the day was almost terrifyingly fast. Izuku was, once again, in Nizu's office to get Himiko's final statements about her parents, and to settle her late transferal in the Gen Ed course. She'd have to stay in the 1A dorms until after the sports festival, however, because they were lacking a room in the Gen Ed dorms, and Cementos was still working on the stadium for this year, double-checking every security measure with Hound Dog and Power Loader. Izuku then had lunch, trained some more, took a shower, and before he knew it he was headed to Momo's room for the movie night they'd planned, which would eventually devolve in a sleepover, as their movie nights often did. This was some sort of routine that Izuku could get used to. He knocked on Momo's door, hearing a muffled "one moment" before the door opened, showing him her room, just like it had always been, with Momo there. "Aizu, you're early." Izuku walked in, smiling at her and leaving a peck on her cheek, which she returned, blushing. "Well, I thought we could start a bit earlier, since I have a couple things to tell both of you. Also, I really enjoy spending time with you too." Momo smiled back at him, closing her door after he'd walked in. Thank you, Aizu. I enjoy spending time with the two of you as well." Kyoka said she'd be here in a couple minutes, she was just washing her teeth. And, right on cue, someone knocked at the door. Momo opened the door, showing their purple-haired girlfriend, technically not yet, but it's not like it was that far away in the future, smiling at them. "Hey Momo, hey Izuku. Sorry, I got caught up in something." "It's fine Kyoka. Do come in," Aizu said he had something to tell us before we started. Izuku gave a peck on the cheek to Kyoka, just like Momo did shortly after, only to get one themselves from a very blushing girl. It still made him giddy, seeing how adorable she looked when she was flustered. Izuku sat down on the bed, taking in a deep breath. This was going to be hard to explain, and he'd get his butt handed to him afterwards. "Okay, so. You know how last night I told you that Aizawa-sensei had asked for me to do some extra training about spatial awareness?" Kyoka nodded as Momo just looked at them. "I lied. We didn't do any of that, in a way. I was with Aizawa, but we did something else." Silence. The girls waited for him to go ahead. "We were in Hosu. We captured Stain." For a moment, no sound could be heard, before Kyoka smiled tensely. "That's a bad joke, Izuku, but I'll let it slide. Be serious now, what did you and Aizawa-sensei do?" Izuku stayed silent for a moment, until Kyoka's eyes widened. "Oh shit. He's not joking, is he?" Kyoka shook her head. "Nope. They really were in Hosu, and they really captured the hero killer. And if he doesn't explain why in the next few seconds, I'll blind him for good." Izuku raised his hands defensively. "I had a good reason, and no one got hurt. Aside from, probably, Stain's pride." He told them about Stain's intention to murder or seriously hurt Ingenium, Tenya's brother, and of how he had to intervene before their class president went on a mad revenge quest that would have probably gotten him seriously hurt, or worse. Kyoka's jack stayed aimed at him for a couple seconds longer, before she lowered them with a sigh. "What am I going to do with you, Izuku?" He just smiled. "Love me like I love the two of you, and assume I knew what I was doing?" The two girls blushed profusely, and Izuku finally realized that he'd told them both he loved them twice in that day. "So much for taking it slow. Sorry, I didn't mean to pressure either of you. It just came out. It's what I feel, sure, but I didn't mean to dash." Izuku was quickly silenced when one of Kyoka's jacks placed itself on his lips. Shut up for a moment. "You love us?" Izuku nodded, not daring to take his eyes off of them. Kyoka turned to look at Momo, who was in turn looking at Kyoka. They made eye contact for a second, before turning to look back at him. I think I love both of you too, Izuku." Momo nodded, before speaking. "So do I, Aizu." He smiled, tears threatening to fall, before shuffling closer and hugging both of his girls. The relief that washed through him was almost impossible to put into words. They stayed like that for a couple of moments, silently hugging each other, before Izuku brought himself slightly back, sitting back on the mattress and looking at them. As for that blonde girl I told you about, her name is Himiko Toga. Izuku had to take another deep breath, although this time it was less to steady himself and more to push down that slowly bubbling anger. She's had a sheet life because of her quirk. Her parents abused her and basically kicked her out. She came here looking for help, and Nizu is going to clear her name and make sure her parents pay the consequences of their actions. Kyoka and Momo looked at him in various degrees of shock, before the purplet spoke. How do you know her? Izuku shook his head. I didn't before today. I knew of her, but I didn't know her. And that wasn't a lie, was it? He knew some things about her. He knew some things about her quirk. But, before that day, Izuku had never known Himiko Toga. He still really didn't, but he would come to know her, while she was here. One last thing. More people will show up here, in due time. They will all look weird, probably even villainous, but they're just people looking for help. Help that I know this school can give them. Twice. Dabi. Magna. Compress. Spinner. Izuku closed his eyes, remembering all their faces. Tamura. Kurogyri. Could he still save them all? He felt his hands being taken, and when he opened his eyes, Izuku saw that each one of his girlfriends was holding one of his hands. We'll do our best to help them, Izu. Kyoka nodded, and he smiled. Maybe he couldn't, but together, maybe they could. Monday came around, and Izuku couldn't have been more excited. And anxious. Today was going to be a great sports festival, one in which he'd actually managed to compete. On the other hand, however, he didn't really want to shatter all his fingers to get through Todoroki, which meant he'd have to at least use fire breath. At least he'd get Mineta expelled. Izuku. The greenette barely raised his head in time before getting an armful of Himiko. They'd gotten close in that last couple of days, and he insisted that she called him Izuku, since he was using her first name too. Himiko. Good morning, how are you? I'm excited. It's the first time I get to see the sports festival in person. How are you feeling? Izuku smiled, her excitement was contagious. I'm a bit nervous, to be honest, but it's only because I might have to break a couple fingers to get through one of my idiot friends. Izuku felt danger sense flare up for a moment, and then he felt a small shock from his side, where one of Kyoka's jacks had hit him. You will do no such thing, no matter how much Todoroki acts like an idiot. Izuku smiled at her, turning to plant a kiss on her forehead. Hi Kyo, I'll try my best. How are you feeling? She shrugged, nuzzling closer to him. A bit worried that my idiot boyfriend will do something stupid and get hurt, but I'm good. Hey Himiko, how are you? Himiko smiled at Kyoka. Since she got close with Izuku, he just jumped to introducing her to his girlfriends, and they got along like a house on fire, in spite of their obvious differences. I'm good. Where's Momo? Probably still asleep, she's the one who sleeps the most out of all of us. Deku. Izuku sighed. Did Katsuki really need to yell that much? Yes, Kaken. I'm gonna win today, so do your best to get to the final and fight me. Of course, Kaken. Good luck to you too. As the explosive blonde stomped away, Izuku felt Kyoka sigh. Honestly, I have no clue how you deal with him. Izuku chuckled. You get used to this eventually. He actually cares, even though he acts all tsundere to hide it. Kyoka giggled at that, followed by Himiko. Hey, Himiko, where will you stay during the next couple of days? Since we get a couple of days off after the festival, you know. Himiko took a contemplative expression for a moment, before brightening again. Oh. Mr. Aizawa said he'd take me in, since he and Mr. Mike have a bedroom that is currently not being used. Kyoka grumbled. Huh. Pay up Kyo. I told you that Aizawa already had the adoption papers ready. What's with the noise this early? Momo. The Ravenette walked downstairs, yawning and stretching, only to get an armful of Izuku, who planted a kiss on her cheek as soon as she'd caught him. Mornin' Aizu. She blushed slightly at his affection, but she didn't push him away. Kyoka was just being a sore loser because I won our bet. He felt, more than seeing it, Kyoka sticking her tongue at him, and he just turned to beam at her. Izuku took a deep breath while closing his locker. It was almost time. Midoriya. Right on cue. Todoroki, you mind if we talk outside? The human candy cane showed emotion, confusion and surprise. He still nodded, following Izuku outside and out of hearing range. Okay, look Todoroki, I know that you feel the need to beat me because my power is somewhat similar to All Might's in destructive capabilities, and because Endeavor is a flaming piece of sheet, but I swear you really don't have to prove anything to anyone. Surprise, even more of it. Midoriya, what do you know about Endeavor? Izuku sighed. Way too much. He's a disappointment as a father and as a hero. The only decent thing about him is that he's good at investigative work, nothing else. Also, it's your quirk, not his or your mother's. Ah, there's the familiar rage. He paid you for this. How much? Izuku wanted to groan. Todoroki, no, you mind if I call you Shudo? Using that name irks me. The other boy didn't react, so Izuku just ignored this issue. Whatever, ignoring the fact that I wouldn't take a quirk from that piece of sheet, let alone money. What part of, I'm aware of what he's done, didn't you get? Again, no reaction. Izuku groaned. Fine, you want to do this like this? Okay. Either you decide to use your fire while we're chatting like this, or I'll beat it out of you. Your SPRM donor didn't put me up to this, but I'll absolutely break my arms if it means that you'll use your quirk to its fullest potential. Present Mick's voice came out of the loudspeakers, informing all the students that the beginning ceremony was about to begin, and Izuku headed towards the main hallway, ignoring Todoroki's eyes on his back. Fing stubborn as a mule, just like all the Todorokis are. Izuku could only pray that, whenever he'd meet Tuya, he would be more reasonable. Somehow, he already knew that it wouldn't be the case. The obstacle race, again. Izuku stretched lightly, taking stock of the people that were surrounding him and zeroing in on Mineta, who was right behind Momo. Hi Mineta. The grape froze up instantly, his plan of latching on the girl's back instantly going in smoke. Izuku placed one hand on his shoulder, gripping enough to lift him up easily. You'll come with me, okay? The grape just nodded, and when Mike gave them the go-ahead to start, Izuku powered up one for all at 10% throughout his entire body, dashing forwards and instantly destroying Todoroki's ice, before it could even spread. First point against Todoroki going at half quirk, and he was dragging Mineta around like a ragdoll, which was a good added bonus. They quickly reached the Robo Inferno, as Mike dubbed it, and Izuku put just a smidge of extra power to punch through the robot's legs, quickly approaching the fall while leaving the road mostly clear for the rest of the students. Ready? Midoriya, what are you? No dash. Izuku jumped over the ledge, using Black Whip to get over it without getting himself or Mineta hurt, which left only one obstacle. The goddamned minefield. Izuku felt his breath hitching for a moment just by seeing the thing. Sure, Katsuki had apologized and they'd had a good relationship until the bitter end came, but Izuku never became comfortable around explosions of any kind. Still, he swallowed hard and set his face with a grim look of determination, charging towards the mines. He was barely aware that Mineta had hidden his face in his arms, before jumping. Float came to him like an old friend, helping him rise up, above the minefield. Izuku soared through the air, and for the first time, he remembered how beautiful it felt to be above everything else. All the other sounds were far away and, for one short moment, Izuku enjoyed it. Unfortunately, the purple grape just had to try and wiggle free of Izuku's grasp, so the boy landed right after the minefield, aiming at the finish line. You want to win, Mineta? Then go. Izuku barely took a moment to aim, before chucking him over the finish line, following shortly afterwards. The cavalry battle was next, and for some reason, most of the teams stayed the same. Weird. Izuku thought that Mei would have joined forces with Mineta, considering that he had the most points, but apparently even she had enough common sense to not want to be anywhere near the grape. It went about as well as anyone would expect. Really, Mineta's team was basically clobbered by the 1A teams, and Izuku's team stole the 1,000,000 points headband in the last minute, earning themselves an explosion from Katsuki for their efforts. Shudo still refused to use his fire, and Izuku was quickly growing frustrated and anxious at the thought of facing him in battle. Chronic pain is a beach that Izuku didn't want to have to deal with for a while. Izuku paced silently in front of the changing rooms, trying to come up with a plan to force that stubborn but to use his fire that didn't involve Izuku breaking his own hands. He could probably overpower him in moments by pushing one for all a bit, or by using some of the various quirks he'd collected, but he didn't really want to do that. Maybe he could. Izuku? His head whipped around, only to see Kyoka in front of the other girls, looking at him in various degrees of confusion. Kyo? What's up? That's what I'm asking. You've been pacing here for the last 5 minutes. Did you even get lunch? Izuku smiled sheepishly, before noticing what they were holding, cheerleading outfits. That son of a. Hey, what are you holding? Kyoka, albeit embarrassed, showed him the outfit. Izuku took a deep breath. Mineta. What about him? I'm going to kill him. Also, please don't wear those, it's just a cruel prank to perv on you. I'll be right back. Izuku stopped to kiss Kyoka and Momo on the forehead and cheek respectively, before aggressively power-walking towards the teachers' booths. The door practically flew open, and Izuku was greeted with the sight of All Might spitting blood while Nizu was sipping tea. Ah, young Midoriya. I thought you would have been preparing for the third event. To what do I owe the pleasure? I want my netta out of UA, principal. I've caught him sexually harassing students more than once, and his behavior is, overall, incredibly creepy. Nizu listened, silently, as Izuku went on a massive rant about the BSTRD's various offenses. And sure, maybe the Greenette mixed in some of the actions that the Grape had pulled in the previous timeline, but if he did, who would have known? And the latest thing, he gave the girls a bunch of horribly revealing cheerleading uniforms. Where did he even get hold of them? And told them that it was compulsory for them to wear them. Either he's expelled, or I'm kicking his butt into Tartarus to face stain. The principal quietly finished his cup of tea with a long sip, before nodding. Thank you, Midoriya. I'll deal with this situation immediately. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. Now go get some lunch. I'm sure you'll show us some very interesting fights today. Izuku just nodded, walking out of the booth and closing the door, before taking a deep, steadying breath. Now, to find Hitoshi, but first lunch. Luckily he'd thought to pack a bento. He quietly sat down at a table, opening his bento while music softly droned in his ears from his earphones, although he had to actively ignore the lyrics of Daddy Issues to avoid thinking about Hisashi. He flinched slightly when he felt a hand on his shoulder, turning around to see Kyoka. Gods, you scared me, Kyo. What's up? He took off one earbud as she sat on his side, smiling. Thanks for earlier. We would have made fools out of ourselves in front of the entire nation. Izuku smiled back, taking her hand in one of his. It's what any good boyfriend would have done. Also, I hated his guts. His behavior was frankly disgusting. I hoped he'd understood after our little chat. Wait, you'd talked to him about this? Izuku nodded. After our last date, I went to his room to talk about this situation. And by talk I mean that I threatened to ruin his reputation and get him expelled if he pulled another stunt like the one he did at the USJ. I really hoped he'd got the message and that he'd clean his act, but apparently some people are just unable to change. He could only hope that not all of them were. As they started showing the pairings for the one-on-one battles, Izuku scanned the stadium until he found who he was looking for, tapping his shoulder. HM? Oh, you're that Greenette from 1A. What's up? Izuku just smiled. Hitoshi was? Kinder? For some reason? I just wanted to wish you a good match, Shinso. Also, there's an open seat in 1A now. If you show off some good fighting skills, I think they might transfer you in the hero course. The brainwash user stared at him with suspicion. Why are you telling me this? Well, because I know a bunch of stuff about everyone here, and you have a lot of potential to be a great hero. Also, Aizawa-sensei has had his eyes on you ever since you stepped foot in here. I'm Izuku Midoriya, by the way. The other just stared for another moment, before sighing. Fine. Thanks, Midoriya. I hope I'm not facing you. Izuku smiled cryptically. Poor Hitoshi. Poor Hitoshi, Izuku found himself thinking as he got on the ring. His opponent seemed to be thinking the same thing, staring at him with a somewhat resigned expression. Once they were close enough, however, Izuku signed something. Quirkless fight? This way you can show that you're more than your quirk, and that you're hero material. Hitoshi huffed, but he couldn't fully hide his smile. Fine, but you're an idiot. Izuku smiled, knowing what had happened before. Midnight gave them the go-ahead, and they lunged at one another. If the public was expecting a flashy, quirk-powered brawl, they got the grittiest fight they'd ever seen. Izuku had to actively hold back his strength for most of the match, as the amount of strength he was capable of using could have accidentally ended the match way too early. In spite of Hitoshi's lean physique, he actually packed quite a punch. Not as bad as shattering your arms and then breaking them again, and oh gods, would he have to do that again with muscular? Izuku was starting to consider that this might have been a bad idea, but still a good punch nonetheless. Maybe he could have worked a bit more on his form, Izuku found himself thinking as, while dodging a particularly sloppy punch, Izuku grabbed Hitoshi's arm and flipped him out of bounds, ending the match. Izuku offered his hand to his opponent, who took it, letting himself be raised up. They walked together out of the arena and towards the locker rooms. Why did you do this, Midoriya? Izuku just smiled. Until 3 months ago, I was considered quirkless. Turns out, my quirk had very specific activation conditions that weren't met until recently, and if my quirk had come in even a day sooner, I would have died. Hitoshi visibly paled, which made the bags under his eyes even more obvious. So yeah. I guess that I'm just trying to help someone who didn't have it easy in the past, you know? Just like someone else did with me. Izuku turned around and offered his hand to Hitoshi once more. Feel free to call me Izuku, and I hope that I'll see you soon in our class, Shinso. The purplet in front of him shook his hand, nodding. Yeah, sure. You can call me Hitoshi, I guess. And thanks, Izuku. Izuku barely paid attention to the other fights in the first round, sitting cross-legged near a wall and muttering quietly about plans to beat Shudo without shattering any bones. It's not like things would change much, after all. He was proven right when the air cooled several degrees, and a glacier appeared in the middle of the arena. Fing endeavor. I'm gonna smear his reputation with dirt, I swear. Just need to pick up dash. Aizu, please, don't plot a hero's downfall out loud. Izuku shut his mouth with a click, turning to look at Momo, who was smiling at him. Sorry Momo, you're right. It's just that he sees me off. She sat down beside him with a sigh, putting her head on his shoulder. I know, love. It irks me to know and seeing how far in his anger Todoroki is. But what can we do? Izuku didn't answer. Aizu? I may or may not have an idea. It's an awful idea, and it would require me to break my bones, but it should get him out of it long enough to realize his own irrationality. Izuku felt soft hands cupping his face, and turning it to look into Momo's eyes. Izuku, listen to me. No matter how much you want to help Todoroki, you will not hurt yourself to do it. Did I make myself clear? Izuku wanted to answer, but seeing Momo this assertive made his stomach do somersaults, so he just nodded, blushing. God damn it. Good. I love you, but if you get hurt I'll kick your butt. Please. What? Izuku found himself blushing further, the stutter coming back for the first time. I am mean, you. Momo started giggling, and Izuku could only blush further, hiding his face in his hands and loudly groaning. Why can't one of his quirks just kill him then and there? Wait. He had a quirk to help Shudo. Momo, I love you so much right now. He left a quick kiss on her forehead before diving into a notebook, writing down so quickly that he would have been afraid for his hands, had he still had the well-familiar ache ode to chronic pain. Momo's fight went like last time, mostly. She actually managed to land a couple of hits on Fumikage before being pushed off field by Dark Shadow, and she didn't seem as discouraged as she'd been the previous time. Izuku could only hope that she'd be fine. Aijuru and Tetsu ended up fainting together, again, and Katsuki beat Ochiko once more, leaving Izuku to fight Shudo, who approached him during the short break. Izuku hoped it was to concede his point and accept to use his fire. Shudo instead took him aside to tell him his dark family story, and how he had to win using only his ice in order to show endeavor. Izuku just sighed, repeating what he'd said earlier. Either you use your fire after this conversation, or you'll be using it after I've beaten you. It's your quirk, and it's about time you understood that. He obviously refused to understand, which left them in the middle of the stadium, staring each other down while Midnight ran the rules by them once more. They'd barely received the go-ahead to start fighting when Shudo shot an iceberg, smaller than the one used against Hanta, against Izuku, who skillfully dodged it with float. Now he only needed to get close enough to touch Shudo. Which, unfortunately, was an endeavor on its own, Izuku found himself thinking as he dodged an icicle thrown at him, barely moving in time to kick down a second one. Luckily, the same issue that had helped Izuku break through Shudo's barrier last time allowed him to do the same once more, hypothermia. By overusing the ice aspect of his quirk, Shudo slowed himself down, making his reflexes worse and making him easier to predict. Thus, after a particularly slow icicle was destroyed, Izuku got in close quarters and, just as he managed to land the first hit on his shoulder, he activated Mind Master. That was one of Izuku's favorite quirks. It allowed him to look into someone's mind and edit their memories, but it also let him unlock memories that were hidden because of trauma or amnesia, which was the aspect that he wanted to use in that moment. Unfortunately, as Izuku had never used this specific quirk on Shudo, it was not easy to find the specific memory he was looking for, even though he knew which one it was. Which meant that he had to look through many of the oldest memories in Shudo's mind. It didn't paint a pretty picture. Sure, Izuku was aware of what his friend had gone through. He'd told him and a few others during one night in which they couldn't fall asleep, when they were supposed to be second years but were instead soldiers in a war. But seeing it firsthand was terrible in a whole different way. Each word, fist, quirk-powered attack, Izuku felt them all as if they were on him. The scar. Learning of Tuya's death. The endless, ruthless training. Shudo's sister crying silently as to not alert endeavor. And then, finally, there it was. Sitting on a couch while watching TV with his mom, Shudo saw All Might for the first time. I don't want to be a hero like Dad, Mom. He always hurts me. Then what kind of hero do you want to be, Shudo? The boy, whose face was not yet scarred, appeared to be in thought for a moment, before looking up at his mother. I want to be a hero like All Might, Mom. He makes me feel safe. Rei Todoroki ruffled his hair, smiling. You can be whatever kind of hero you want to be, Shudo. You don't have to be anything you don't want to be, because your quirk is yours and so is your life. To the outsiders, Izuku touched Shudo's arm for a second before the dual-haired boy burst into flame, making the greenette jump back. For Izuku, however, it felt like he'd been in Shudo's mind for a year, if the headache that was starting to form meant anything. He powered through, however, looking at his friend's face with a grim expression, teeth baring, close to a smile but not quite, while his eyes showed mirth. "You're a crazy man, Midoriya. So I've been told." Shudo's face started to resemble a real smile. "You could have won this easily, but you had to put your nose in someone else's business." Izuku smirked. "Well, butting in other people's business is what a hero does. And who said I couldn't win this anyways?" Shudo's smile stayed firmly fixed on his face, and neither of the boys was truly aware of Endeavor yelling something from the stands as they launched their last attack. Izuku knew that this was a shitty idea, but he couldn't really do anything different, just hope that his own fire would be stronger than Shudo's. The merits of this idea started dying as soon as he saw the barrage of fire that Shudo was throwing at him, so Izuku decided that a diversion would probably work best. He huffed out a burst of smoke, using smokescreen to hide the field from view and to impede Shudo's sight. Sure, that meant that Izuku had some difficulties in watching where his opponent was too, but Shudo wasn't going to move from there, which meant that, when Izuku dashed forwards with one for all coursing through him, his fist instantly connected with the other boy's cheek, knocking him out and out of bounds. "Recovery Girl will have my skin." Unsurprisingly, Recovery Girl tore into him for what the two of them had done. "Self-induced hypothermia, a concussion, and you have a FING migraine. How did you even get a migraine? You didn't get hit on the head." Izuku smiled sheepishly, fighting off the wave of exhaustion that came with the youthful heroine's quirk. "At least I didn't break any bones?" His attempt at humor didn't land as he hoped for, as the only answer he got was a harsh glare from Recovery Girl. "Out of here, if you're still in pain by the time your match comes, you're bowing out." "Yes, madam." He fled before she could react. Izuku just smiled when Momo looked at him with a thoroughly unimpressed stare. "So that was your plan for not breaking any bones? Giving yourself a migraine?" Izuku raised his hands defensively. "Okay, I didn't know that memory would be so deep down. Also, I didn't break any bones. He's only got a slight concussion, which Recovery Girl already healed. I also won." Which was a definite improvement from the previous time, Izuku didn't say. Momo just sighed, shaking her head, while Kyoka crossed her arms. "Honestly, Izuku. What are we going to do with you?" Izuku smiled. "Love me and trust." One knew what I was doing? They sighed. He kept smiling. Tenya swiftly dealt with Shiozaki, unlike what Denki had done the previous round. Fumikage defeated Mina quickly thanks to his capabilities as a long-distance fighter, and Katsuki quickly beat Aijuru, whose hardening was strong, but not strong enough to withstand that many explosions. Which meant that Izuku had to fight Tenya, something that hadn't occurred to him before that moment. "I can't believe I forgot that Ida would beat Shiozaki. I mean, it's obvious, their quirks seem good counters, but he's just far more skilled in using his own." Aizu, muttering. He closed his mouth with a click. "Right, thanks Momo. Regardless," Kyoka continued, "as long as you don't pull another awful, self-sacrificing strategy like you did with Todoroki, I'm sure you'll manage." Izuku smiled sheepishly before giving both of his girls a kiss on the cheek and heading to the waiting room. Tenya's speed was something that Izuku didn't manage to match until he'd reached about 20% of One for All's power, which meant that a speed fight was, for now at least, out of his cards. Most of the quirks he had were incredibly easy to avoid with speed, which meant that Izuku's best chance would be a distraction with Smokescreen and a surprise attack with Float and Black Whip. Izuku took position on one end of the arena, staring down his friend before smiling. "No hard feelings, regardless how the match ends." Tenya smiled back. "Of course. But know that I'll do my best to beat you, Midoriya. Wouldn't be you if you didn't, and I'll do the same." Midnight gave them the go-ahead, and smoke filled the arena just as Tenya charged him. Smokescreen was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it limited his enemy's field of view, but it also hindered his own. Which is why, during Izuku's final battle with All for One, he stole one of his heat vision quirks, just to even the playing field. Izuku rarely used it because, at lengths, it made his eyes water too much to actually see, but in a battle like this one, it hopefully wouldn't be an issue. Tenya had stopped just shy of the end of the arena, and he seemed to be looking for Izuku in the smoke. Good. The decoy had worked, and now it was time for the second part of this plan, actually sending Tenya out of bounds. Izuku activated Float, slowly rising until he was at the very limit of the smoke curtain, which was rapidly going away, and then he brought out 2 strands of Black Whip. The quick movement of the energy strings wiped away the smoke, but not so fast that Tenya could notice them approaching until they'd grabbed him. The match was basically over, as Izuku lifted him up and placed him out of bounds. While returning to the stands, Izuku passed by Katsuki. "Hey, Kaken. Nerd." Izuku smiled. "See you in the final." The blonde smiled back, although in a much more feral way. "Of FING course. Can't wait to see what you can do with this borrowed power of yours, and the stolen power you have." It stung a bit, because he'd actually mastered one for all before, but he couldn't deny stealing quirks from villains. Momo and Kyoka didn't scold him, this time. His strategy was solid enough that he didn't need to hurt anyone. "So, now it's Bakugo, huh?" Izuku smiled at Kyoka's question. "Yeah, either him or Tokoyami. Although, considering Dark Shadow's weakness." Momo looked at him. "You noticed?" "No, he actually told me before the cavalry battle. Still, if Tokoyami manages one straight hit on Kaken, this match could be one-sided in a completely different direction." Of course, because Izuku hadn't influenced Fumikage enough to make him do anything different, Katsuki won. Dark Shadow was weak to light, which meant that there was no way for the bird-headed teen to win without getting in close quarters with Katsuki. Too bad, it would have made for another interesting match. "Hey, Kaken, would you believe me if I told you that we've done this 100 times and that I've beaten you all the times?" The explosive blonde just smirked. "As if, you FING nerd. Come at me with all you've got, if you want this win." It was worth a shot. Izuku took a deep breath, bracing himself for the many explosions his ears and body would feel soon, and took a fighting stance, just as Katsuki did the same. Midnight gave them the go-ahead. Katsuki, as usual, started with a right hook, but something was off. It was clearly a feint to throw Izuku off, and he acted as if he'd taken it. The explosive blonde reacted by using his explosions to hover over Izuku and go for a hit to the back of his head. A successful idea, had Izuku not known of the feint. The greenette turned around, punching Katsuki in the gut and pushing him away. It was only thanks to his explosions that Katsuki managed to stay within the bounds of the arena, and Izuku's side. A good opportunity gone to hell. Float was helpful to stay out of range with some explosions, and Black Whip allowed Izuku to push Katsuki back when he got too close, but other than that, most of his quirks were useless in this fight. Smokescreen would be pushed back by a powerful explosion. Most of the quirks in All for One were support or recon quirks, which left him only with Fa Gene and the Second's quirk as viable options. Since Second's power was a bit too destructive, Fa Gene was the only valid idea. Izuku powered up One for All to the limit his body could sustain, and activated Fa Gene, starting to bounce around the arena, dodging Katsuki's explosive hits as well as his regular blows. The longer Izuku kept moving, the stronger his attack would be. He'd attained a faux 100% in the same way before, and while he knew that going that far would probably kill Katsuki, he could go for something closer to a 40% to blow him out of bounds. "Quit dodging, FING nerd, and fight me." Izuku smiled. "You asked for this, Kaken." He dropped down in front of Katsuki, throwing one punch. It didn't even connect, as Izuku held back at 1 inch from Katsuki's face, but the wind pressure didn't really care about that, pushing his opponent back with the strength of a hurricane, and sending him out of bounds. The award ceremony wasn't anything different from what it had been all that time back, in Izuku's opinion. It felt a bit weird to be standing on the podium, especially as Kaken wasn't tied up, but just quietly sulking on the second place, and it was especially weird to see Tenya standing on the podium, but that's what happens when you mess with time. "I am extremely proud of you, my boy," All Might sort of whispered, which meant that it was only heard by those on the podium, instead of it being heard by the entire stadium. "You outdid yourself, and now the entire world knows that you're here. Well done." Izuku smiled, trying not to tear up. It had been years, but getting praise was still something that brought him to tears. Thank you, All Might." The greenette bowed just as the blonde man put the gold medal around his neck. "And, go for the plus ultra, instead of thanking everyone for being here." All Might gave him a confused smile, but obliged, avoiding everyone the second-hand embarrassment that had come all those years back. As per usual, the first years got almost an entire week off after the sports festival, as the second and third years ones were on the following 2 days, and then Thursday and Friday were off for everyone, as to give time to all the various agencies to send in their offers for the students. This left Izuku with a lot of free time, which he spent catching up on some subjects. Bite him, training took out a good chunk of his time in the previous couple of weeks, and finals were approaching way too quickly, and, most importantly, researching the various people he'd need to collect soon with Nizu. Which meant that, when Monday rolled around, Izuku had all but forgot about the amount of offers that would come their way. "Good morning, Hellspawn. Sit down." Aizawa's dry tone welcomed them back in the classroom as he stood by the desk, wearing his usual "I don't want to be here" look. He gave them a bit of time to settle in their places before speaking. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you all for how you performed in the sports festival. Although some of you, and he was definitely eyeing both Izuku and Shudo, didn't show enough restraint, this worked somewhat in your favor. Be warned, usually the first year's results don't look like this, but considering the exceptional circumstances you've been placed in, I'm not entirely surprised by the amount of offers you received. The tired teacher turned on the projector, showing on one of the walls how the internship offers were spread out. Unsurprisingly, for everyone bar himself, Izuku had received the highest number of offers, peaking at 4235, followed shortly by Shudo, who had 2317, and by Kaken, with 1503 offers. The following numbers quickly dwindled, with Momo at 705, Fumikage and Tenya at 540 and 520 respectively, all the way down to Denki, who got 15 offers. For those of you who didn't receive any offers, or who aren't satisfied with their offers, we have a list of 40 agencies partnered with UA who are willing to house interns for the next week, so you don't have to worry. Aizawa, who had clearly got a soft spot for all of them, allowed them a couple of minutes to chatter about their offers, and let their excitement die down a little bit before catching their attention again. I have one last announcement before we go ahead with this morning's lesson. As some of you might have noticed, Mineta is no longer in the class. He's been expelled on basis of SXL offenses towards a number of students and teachers. His seat will be taken by Hitoshi Shinso. As the chatter picked up again, Aizawa walked to the door, opening it and letting in the tired-looking boy. Izuku sighed, glad that Hitoshi would get a spot in 1A, and already dreading the number of conspiracy theories Shudo would send his way. Hitoshi walked until he was behind Izuku, taking what once had been Mineta's seat. Now for our lesson. This will not be a practical test or anything that you've seen before, but it will still be an important step on your road to become heroes. He let the suspense build up for a couple more moments before explaining himself. Today, you'll be picking your hero names. These are temporary, so you may change them later, but you should still pick them with attention, as they will be what the public will know you as. For this reason, I've asked one of my colleagues to help you pick. Aizawa had barely finished his sentence before the door slammed open, revealing Midnight, standing there and smiling at them. It's also because your teacher let Mike pick his, don't let his logical facade trick you. Aizawa barely grumbled, curling inside his yellow sleeping bag and letting Midnight pick up his slack, which she immediately did by picking up a couple stacks of papers and handing them to each student. Take a couple each. You'll have some time to think about your names, and then you'll come here and share them with the class. Having already picked a name for himself, Izuku spent his time going through his offers and comparing them with the approximate list of locations for the soon-to-be-rescued villains that Nizu had sent him, and by doing so, a number of possible coincidences showed themselves. Now, if only Izuku could organize a couple of groups and spread them around Japan to collect these people before they got caught into the League's bullshit. Midoriya. Izuku barely restrained himself from activating One for All and throwing his desk at Midnight. Barely. Why yes, ma'am? Would you mind sharing your hero name with the class? Izuku nodded, taking in a deep breath and getting up with his small whiteboard in his hands. This name didn't have the same emotional power as Deku did, but Izuku didn't want to be called an insult for a second hero career, especially now that he didn't have as many ties to that title, which was why he'd chosen that second name. I'm going to be the enduring hero, Atlas. A dashing name which promises powerful feats. Your name is approved, Midoriya. Next one. Izuku tried to listen to his classmates as they picked the same names, with a couple of exceptions. Ida went with Sterling, which was fitting and still close enough to the Ingenium brand, while Shudo, after some prodding from Izuku and Momo, ended up going with the freezing hero, Firestorm, which was an interesting oxymoron. By the time lunchtime had arrived, Izuku had developed part of a plan. He just needed a couple of people to go along with it, and he already had a couple ideas. Raven, Violet and Green. Me, girls, would you mind coming to my dorm tonight? I have sort of an idea for the thing I told you about, but I need some help. Raven Queen, of course Izu. Her purple hotness, Shizuku, no prob. Me, thanks, love you both. That solved a couple ones. Kaken, you're coming to my dorm tonight. Bakugu almost threw a punch at his head. And why the F should I do that? You know why. The blonde nodded. Someone else? Izuku tilted his head in thought. Momo and Kyo, and I'm thinking of asking Shudo too. Ha! Why icy hot? Izuku looked to make sure that no one was listening, before inching closer and whispering into Katsuki's ear. One of the villains is his assumed dead brother, Kaken. And he's also the biggest issue at the camp. Katsuki nodded jerkily before going back to get some more napkins, as Izuku headed to his usual table with Achiko, Tenya and Shudo, and Hitoshi in tow. So, have you guys already picked where you're going to go? Achiko's chipper tone brought Izuku out of his enjoyment of his food. I'm probably going to go with Mike-sensei, since I just transferred. Izuku nodded at Hitoshi's comment, hiding a knowing smile with the pretense of swallowing some rice. Of course Hitoshi would go with Mike. He saw the man as his own father, as well as Aizawa, of course. That's a nice choice, Shinso. I'm thinking of going with Gunhead, since I'm not that sharp in close quarters. I thought you would have picked a more rescue-oriented hero, Uraraka. Achiko flushed slightly at Tenya's comment, before humming in thought. That was my plan at first, but after the USJ I realized that it would be better if I had some fighting applications for my quirk, you know? And the sports festival only solidified that idea. Izuku almost choked on his food at the reminder of what could have been. Achiko had no idea. That's a valid reasoning, Uraraka. As Aizawa-sensei said, we can't be one-trick ponies, otherwise we'll be toast. I don't remember him ever saying that, Midoriya. He'd mixed the timelines. He probably mentioned it during one of our stealth trainings? I've had a couple of one-on-one sessions with him, so it makes sense that I might have mixed up some things. At least Kyo wasn't there to hear him bullshit his way through that conversation. Anyways, where are you planning to go, Shudo? Ignoring Tenya's indignant sputtering was easy, especially since Shudo's expression got much darker. I was thinking of going at my father's. Izuku frowned. Didn't you also get an offer from Hawks? If it's like that, you could come with me and, I think, Tokoyami? I think it would be a safer choice. That would be a safe way to get him away from Endeavor, as well as a way for him to help him get Tuya into their rehabilitation program. Shudo seemed to consider the idea for a couple of seconds, before nodding. I believe that could be a valuable learning experience. Very well, Midoriya, I'll accept Hawk's offer. You can call me Izuku, Shudo. And the same goes for all of you, actually. We've been through so much together, it feels weird to still be so formal. Then you can call me Achiko. You may then call me Tenya. Sure, whatever, call me Hitoshi. Shudo will be fine, although anything is better than my last name.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.